Chapter 493. Reynolds continued to push his luck. Sigh. If I'm worried, the success rate might drop again. Townsend stomped his feet. No matter what, I won't make things difficult for you, okay? Reynolds immediately said, That's a deal. Then I can focus on solving Miss Townsend's problem. Townsend was impatient. Then how long will it take for it to work? Reynolds chuckled. It takes many years for others to have good results. How can you expect to reach the sky in one step? Townsend was a little disappointed. How long will it take? About 5 or 6 months. I can guarantee that it will work. Do you have a patience? Townsend thought that it would take at least a year, but it was only 5 or 6 months. It was much shorter than he expected. He said happily, Okay, I'll wait for you. His words were a little flirtatious, like a girl saying goodbye to her lover. However, Townsend was too careless to notice it. In fact, Reynolds wasn't sure if his secret potion would work. When he was in the academy, Reynolds showed Randolph the potion that Athena gave him. Randolph knew that this potion could increase muscle strength and change the shape of one's body. Reynolds had also learned some methods of making medicine in Chang Academy. That was why he had such an idea. If it was successful, would the stores sell more of this medicine? Beauty was a source of trouble, and he had to grasp the power of that. Sitting on a soft eaglefish skin carpet, Reynolds sipped a fragrant wine made from precious seaweed that grew in the dead waters of the Dara Inland Sea, while enjoying the heavenly voice of the famous singer of the Succubus clan. She was accompanied by a dozen graceful demon butterfly clan women, whose faces were covered with white veils. They were barefooted and danced gracefully. The phrase dancing gracefully was most appropriate for them. If there was anyone who could be compared to the mermaids as dancers, Reynolds would undoubtedly say that it was the Butterfly Clan. When the beautiful wings spread, the Butterfly Clan women were like peacocks spreading their tails. Their delicate bodies were partly hidden and partly visible. Their pitiful temperament could easily provoke the abuse hidden deep in the hearts of men. Everyone present at the banquet was a dignified, graceful, and cultured figure. However, at this moment, their faces revealed a radiance similar to that of a hungry wolf seeing a sheep. Their beastly appearances were completely exposed. The Demon Butterfly Clan was a rare branch of the Demon Clan on the continent. They lived in the forest region, and their fates were usually very miserable. If they were discovered, they would most likely be captured and enslaved. The demonic beasts had a low status and had no room for resistance. The other upper-class members of the Demon Clan also looked down on them, except for the Demon Butterfly Clan, because they were considered to be angels who had been banished to the mortal world by God because they had committed a grave mistake. Like the mermaids, the demonic butterfly race was a monogamous race. Reynolds was currently in the Sea Sky Pavilion of the Aquilan first-class city, Gato. His face was completely different from 3 months ago, but upon closer inspection, it didn't seem much different. This was a very mysterious feeling, and this was the effect of the ever-changing mask on his face. Ever-changing was the Dragon Clan's chief, as well as the treasurer of Yeyez's father, Mike Sayer. Several hundred years ago, the thousand-faced thief, Dikeji, used a special method to create a disguised mask with his family's bloodline. Dikeji was a true thief, just like the thieves on Earth. When he had nothing to do, he would steal things. It was like he was addicted to drugs, and he had countless enemies. However, with ever-changing, he could continue to be unbridled, and no one could take revenge on him until he died of old age. Other than the excitement of stealing, Dikeji's heart couldn't hold anything else. In the end, he never married and his bloodline was cut off, so no one could create ever-changing. The only thing he left behind were the 2 masks he had used when he was alive. Although it was a collection, Mike Sayer didn't care about his treasures at all. Even the 2 masks of the world-famous Dikeji were no exception. In fact, when he secretly led Reynolds to his treasury, they found that there were countless treasures that everyone yearned for even in their dreams, but they were all covered in a thick layer of dust. It was really a waste of heaven's treasures. The Dragon Clan's fanaticism for collecting treasures was as famous as their wealth, but they liked the feeling of having good things more than the practical value of the treasures themselves. Thus, Reynolds was at ease and used Yi to borrow some things that he could use, and the two ever-changing masks were one of them. Reynolds used one for himself, and the other one was given to Irene. Through it, the user could freely change their skin color and face to a certain extent. A delicate person could become rough. A beautiful woman could become ugly. It was very convenient. Of course, in order to make Yi willing to be blackmailed by him, Reynolds also gave her some benefits. After discussing with the pharmacist, he developed the secret medicine of the imperial family into a special medicine. In a month, her little rabbit had grown a lot, and it was no longer as flat as it was in the square of Jajin Road. Ever since the first day he obtained the shape-shifting ability, Reynolds had gradually used it to change his appearance. This change was minimal, and Reynolds controlled it very well. He only changed a little every day because many people had already seen his face. If he suddenly changed his appearance, there would definitely be a problem. Doing it step by step was not the case. People always had a psychological habit of adapting. If someone changed a little every day, the accumulation would be almost completely different from the previous person, and they would still think that it was the same. With this mask, Reynolds was no longer afraid to show his face in public because the enemies and enemies of the Tang Empire would no longer recognize him. Thus, this upstart Ackland, who relied on the two special medicines, began to appear more and more frequently in the upper social circles. Because Reynolds wanted to study politics, he wanted to understand political struggles. Although Reynolds hated this kind of thing the most on Earth, he had no choice. He was too inexperienced in the past, and had almost been played to death by guys. Foreign merchants couldn't get involved in Ackland's political circles, but Reynolds could indirectly control others to raise his status and influence. The current him was already someone who could speak in the upper class. All of this was learned on Earth, brought about by the relevant medicine formulas. Knowledge is power, this saying was true. Reynolds began to regret doing nothing all day, idling around. Fortunately, he was doing quite well now. Mr. Dennis? Reynolds snapped out of his contemplation. A middle-aged eel man with a mustache and a fair complexion was right in front of him, looking at him with a lewd smile. He was also the host of this banquet, the chairman of Gachuo City's tax guild, James. The dance had already ended, but the butterfly demons stood in 3 rows on the center stage. Reynolds felt his hair stand on end. Looking at this guy's pretty boy face, could it be that he was gay? But he soon knew that he guessed wrong. Chapter 494. Mr. Dennis, what do you think of the butterfly demons here? If you like any of them, you can bring one back later and let her serve you well. I wonder if Mr. Dennis has enjoyed a butterfly demon before. It's very exciting. Reynolds was already used to this kind of banquet, where servants were given as gifts to curry favor. He put on a lewd smile like a tortoise meeting a tortoise with a tortoise, a kindred spirit. All right, Mr. James, thank you for your kind intentions. He couldn't refuse this gift. Otherwise, the host might think that he wasn't giving him face or didn't have a good impression of him. It might cause displeasure and conflict. What Reynolds needed to do now was to be smooth and slick and make friends with as many strong people as possible in the shortest amount of time. Of course, he wouldn't do something so stupid. Besides, the women who were given as gifts didn't have much status. Usually, they could only be used as tools for the recipient to vent his lust. After being ravaged, they would be abandoned or ostracized. Their fates were miserable. It was better to take them for himself. At least they would be better off than falling into the hands of others. Ever since Reynolds entered the social scene, he had already received 8 servants. He didn't even need Irene to clean the house. There were also Lorna, Lisa, and Helena to do the chores themselves. Seeing that he was willing to accept, James said happily, Mr. Dennis, all right, you can pick one. Let's see who will be lucky enough to receive your favor. Reynolds turned his gaze back to the stage and swept his gaze over the butterfly demons. They were all masked with white veils, so he couldn't see their faces clearly. This was the habit of gifting servants. It greatly increased the excitement of a lottery. The butterfly demons also unabashedly shot their burning gazes at Reynolds because he was the youngest of the guests present. His modified appearance couldn't be considered handsome, but it was rather boorish and heroic. Being his servant was much better than being his grandfather and being an old man with one foot in the grave. James seconded, "Mr. Dennis, you can rest assured. They are all beauties." Reynolds's gaze was fixed on the tallest butterfly demon dancer. "Mr. James, the one in yellow in the middle of the second row will do." Because Reynolds saw that she seemed to be struggling when dancing just now, as if she was injured, he always chose the most pitiful when choosing servants and tried his best to help those who needed it the most. Furthermore, all the other butterfly demons were flirting with him, hoping to gain his favor. Only that one was an exception. She even turned her head away, not even sparing Reynolds' glance. James said regretfully, "Mr. Dennis, in fact, the dancing quality of a butterfly demon is usually inversely proportional to its height. The most outstanding ones can even dance on the palm of your hand. It can be said to be the best. It's a pity that everyone only has one chance, Mr. Dennis." "What a pity. But there will be another chance next time. Remember that, Mr. Dennis." Reynolds pretended to be sad and said, "Oh, how unlucky, Mr. James. If you have any more good stuff, don't forget Dennis." James smiled and said, "Definitely, definitely." The chosen butterfly demon was brought off the stage by the male tortoise servant. The other butterfly demons revealed disappointed expressions before continuing to flirt with other men who were more pleasing to the eye. "Mr. Dennis, in 8 days, AOC will be holding a banquet in Karamik. I wonder if you will be able to attend?" As soon as James left, a middle-aged man at Renault's table handed over an invitation. Long before the banquet began, James had introduced him to everyone present. Thus, Reynolds recognized him. He was AOC, the city guard of the first-class city of Karamik. Reynolds calculated that there was still time, so he nodded and said, "Mr. AOC's hospitality is difficult to decline. Dennis will definitely be there on time." After exchanging pleasantries with AOC, the third head of the AOC family in BB City, Oliver AOC, also came over and said, "Oliver, on behalf of the family, sincerely invites Mr. Dennis to come and enjoy our special training of the hot dance on the Spirit Cohen water." Everyone knew that the banquet was coming to an end after the gift of servants, so they took the opportunity to make invitations. Reynolds, the aquiline upstart who had risen at an astonishing speed, naturally became the focus of attention. The life of a politician was usually busy and tiring. Reynolds deeply understood this. After dealing with everyone, Reynolds had just breathed a sigh of relief when a call came from behind him. "Mr. Dennis." Reynolds turned his head numbly. It was a warrior with a pair of bifurcated horns on his head and a white helmet. "Our family head invites you to come over. Please be on time tomorrow night." Everyone was very polite when they invited Reynolds. Only the white helmet warrior was an exception, and he indeed had the qualifications. Because the person he represented was the Aquiline Island Lord, the hero-level expert, Mike Sayer. Reynolds was shocked. Could it be that Mike Sayer already knew about the matter of him knocking down Yeyez's bamboo pole? Reynolds' residence was in Gachuo City. It was called a residence because it was already big enough. It could not be compared to the dorms in Chong, an academy, or Valila's small house. It took up over 20,000 square meters. It could not be considered a super mansion, but for a merchant to obtain such a large piece of land, it was already rare. Several special medicines had brought him huge profits. Reynolds could not be compared to before. He could be said to be the person who had risen the fastest in Aquiline and the entire King's Realm. There were 2 teams of shrimp and crab warriors patrolling the outer courtyard 24 hours a day. Although there was an alarm barrier outside, he still had to be careful. Then again, with Reynolds' current position, it was indeed a bit embarrassing to not have any guards. But there was no need to be too exaggerated. This was because his neighbors were all famous people in the surrounding area. There were many powerful guards, so as long as something happened here, there would definitely be people coming to help. There were probably not many people who dared to send people to assassinate him. Otherwise, if they were found out, they would not be able to bear the consequences. The safest thing was Aaron's puppets. Scout bees, water spiders, earth frogs, wind eagles, etc. They were everywhere, in the sky, in the ground, in the trees, in the grass. They were impossible to guard against. With Aaron's consciousness, they could all be used as scouts. This was another strong point of the spirit envoys. It could be described as an inescapable net that covered the entire residence. No matter how high level an assassin was, they could all hide. Pushing open the door to the inner courtyard, his eyes suddenly opened up. There were pavilions and terraces, exquisite and elegant. The grass was green and flat, and all kinds of flowers bloomed. The water flowed, and the tinkling sound were like wind chimes, adding a bit of elegance to the inner courtyard. This was built by Reynolds according to the style of Earth. There was only one place like this for the time being. The butterfly monster just followed behind Reynolds without saying a word. Even when they arrived here, it was still like this. But when her slender and beautiful phoenix eyes saw the natural and pleasing scenery in front of her, she finally couldn't help but look around, feeling a sense of familiarity, as if she had returned home. Chapter 495. The night was already dark, but the inner court was still very bright under the light of the magic flames floating in the air. The center of the inner court was filled with smoke, and thick fog kept rising. From time to time, there were a few women's cries. Reynolds took off his shoes, stepped on the soft grass, and walked into the depths of the smoke. The butterfly demon hesitated for a moment, then flapped its wings and followed. Strangely, the deepest part of the smoke was the faintest. This was caused by the fog-expelling pearl that Reynolds had borrowed from Mike Sayer. The women were playing in the super-large swimming pool, including some other cute pets, Irene's elemental puppet, and the 8 different race slaves that Reynolds had obtained from various social occasions. They were from the Demon Clan, the Enchanted Sound Clan, the Hag Clan, the Swan Clan, the Human Clan, and so on. These women who were already slaves felt strange. They had heard that slaves didn't have any status, but they didn't expect that this master didn't have any heirs. In addition to the light daily work, he could even bathe with the other women in the most comfortable swimming pool in the inner court. It was like heaven. The most incredible thing was that Dennis didn't even ask them to serve him in bed. At most, he would occasionally take advantage of them. From the Swan Clan dancer who had arrived 2 months ago to the cat girl who had just arrived a few days ago, they were no exception. If they didn't know that this master started off with aphrodisiacs and aphrodisiacs, they would even suspect that he had some defects. Of course, this was because Reynolds, who came from Earth, didn't have the strict concept of slaves in the world of kings, so he gave them enough freedom. Irene had already been informed by the grass leech puppet outside the pool, so she had been paying attention. When Reynolds appeared, she saw him and swam overexcitedly. She raised her head and said, "Dennis, you're back?" When there were outsiders, Irene always used a pseudonym. The other women who were playing also turned around and greeted in unison to show their respect for Reynolds. Although he didn't have any heirs, the most basic etiquette of a master and a servant was still something that the women didn't dare to neglect. Reynolds laughed. "Well, you guys continue playing. Don't worry about me." Splash! Irene's delicate body emerged from the water and pulled Reynolds' arm, trying to drag him into the water like a spoiled child. At this time, the shadow of the butterfly demon also became clear from the thick fog. After the girls were slightly surprised, they returned to normal. They were already used to it. It was just that they had a new companion. Reynolds crouched down and patted Irene's shoulder. "Go on, Linger. I'll be right there," Irene said obediently. "Okay, but you have to be quick, Dennis." The butterfly monster was even more surprised at the scene in front of her because she saw that 8 of the girls had a small but very bright red shackle pattern on their wrists, just like her. That was the symbol of a servant. Wasn't it too outrageous for a servant to bathe with her master? Reynolds turned to the butterfly demon beside him and said, "Help me take off my clothes." The butterfly demon's gaze swept over him, and then she silently obeyed. Right now, she didn't have a choice at all. The outer clothes slowly flew to the grass, one by one. The butterfly demon's technique wasn't skillful, but it wasn't surprising because she had never helped a man take off his clothes before. Although the status of a servant was low, they were definitely virgins. Otherwise, it would be disrespectful to the recipient. This was very taboo in social interactions. Although she wasn't skillful, Reynolds was quickly left with only his underwear. The butterfly demon hesitated for a moment, and then reached out to take it off. Reynolds waved his hand and said, "That's enough." The other servants were disappointed. Up until now, they had never seen Reynolds's appearance. After a long time, their strong curiosity had faintly turned into desire. But that guy Reynolds definitely wouldn't disappoint. Reynolds said to the butterfly demon, "Take off your mask and your clothes." The butterfly demon, who had just let out a sigh of relief, became nervous again. This time, she hesitated for a long time, a full 10 seconds before taking off her mask. A beautiful face that was both happy and angry slowly appeared in front of Reynolds' eyes. Although he didn't know whether what James said about the butterfly demon's dance quality being inversely proportional to her height was true or false, Reynolds was absolutely satisfied with this face. Of course, he had already seen many beautiful women, so he was only slightly surprised. Then the butterfly demon continued to take off her gauze and long skirt, leaving only her underwear. The butterfly demon's body was trembling. It wasn't because she was cold, but because she had to protect her female private parts from being violated, even though she knew it was very powerless. Reynolds only coldly threw down 2 words, "Continue." The butterfly demon heard this and was startled. She gritted her teeth and continued to move according to Reynolds' orders. Not long after, Su Qing's snow-like white body was exposed to the air, as light as the mist in the air. The butterfly demon covered her chest with one hand and covered her body with the other, making a final struggle. Her hand was too slender, but Reynolds' burning eyes still saw the truth. TSK, what a beautiful body. Reynolds' hand reached out to grab her chest. "It's here." The butterfly demon closed her beautiful eyes, waiting for her pure and flawless body to finally be unable to escape the fate of being molested. But she quickly felt Reynolds' hand land on her pink back. She only heard that dentist laugh loudly. "Beauty, get down." A strong force rushed over. The butterfly demon exclaimed and immediately fell into the swimming pool. Then, she was hugged by several pairs of arms. Nicole of the cat demon race whispered, "Did he scare you? Our master likes to play pranks. We were all scared at the beginning. In fact, he is very good." Naturally, the same race was more intimate. The butterfly demon spoke for the first time. "Really?" Her voice was very soft, and with her light body, it was just right. The swan demon also said, "Really? As long as you let go, he won't play pranks anymore." The butterfly demon looked at Reynolds with suspicion, but found that he had already swam far away in another direction. Only then did she confirm that the words of the two were not false. After Reynolds came closer, Aaron immediately noticed that he was different from the past. Although he was smiling, his brows were somewhat knotted. It was a sign that he had something on his mind. Aaron knew that since Reynolds solved the matter of Yi, his business was booming day by day. During this period of time, he was even more proud of his success. Now, there must be something troublesome. She greeted him and said, "Dennis, what's wrong?" Reynolds didn't want his troubles to break the happy scene in front of him. He smiled and said, "It's nothing. Our business side has a small problem. It will be solved soon." "Dennis Gidge, can I help you?" As early as when Reynolds' business started, Aaron learned to help. She worked hard to become a right-hand man. Now, she could share his worries. Of course, it was only some management matters. In terms of communication, Reynolds still personally took care of it. Otherwise, she would not go back to live in the future. "Blackface ghost, what kind of trouble do you have? Tell me, I'll help you solve it." After Yiye's chest saw the results, he reverted to his old form of address. Reynolds was too lazy to pay attention to it. It was just a form of address, nothing more. This way, it seemed a bit more intimate, and he felt a bit more at ease when he struck the bamboo pole. Yawning, Reynolds said, "It's nothing. It's just a small matter. There's no need to make a fuss about it. I'll have to trouble Miss Yi to take action." Reynolds thought, no matter how bad *SSU, Yi are, you won't be able to help this time. Because the trouble is your father, Mike Sayer. That white-helmeted warrior had warned Reynolds not to tell Yi about going to Dragon Island tomorrow night. Otherwise, he would be in trouble at that time. Reynolds certainly didn't dare to act rashly. Gato was only 300 li away from Dragon Island, that is, Gadwa City. Riding on a seal that could travel in water as if it was flat land, he arrived in half a day. In the evening, Reynolds arrived at Mike Sayer's Dragon Mansion on time. Although he had secretly gone to the treasury with Yi several times, it was always at night, so he couldn't see anything. It was the first time during the day. The one who received him was the white-helmeted dragon warrior from that day, Simon. Reynolds, who followed him all the way inside, couldn't help but marvel at the magnificence of the Dragon Mansion. It was a living replica of the Forbidden City. There were countless crisscrossing paths inside, just like a spider web. If no one led the way, it was very likely to get lost. Originally, Reynolds thought that the Dragon Mansion was full of strong people, but unexpectedly, he didn't find many people. However, he had a strange feeling. In the flowers on the trees, and even in the ground, the river seemed to have a potential threat. It was a very strange feeling. Perhaps it was the keen sense of danger of a person who had experienced life and death. There were few old servants who were repairing the flowers and plants or sweeping the floor. It seemed that they were not simple. For the power of this place, Reynolds could only use one word to describe it: crouching tiger, hidden dragon. Brother Simon, I don't know why your island master is looking for a nobody like me. Before seeing Mike Sayer, it was necessary to sound him out and be mentally prepared so as not to be too passive at that time. The one he had to face was not an ordinary person. Killing him was as simple as pinching an ant. Simon didn't turn his head and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Dennis, I don't know about this." Others have always been unable to guess the island master's thoughts. However, there are not many people who can get his invitation. I think you should feel honored. Honor my ass, Reynolds said in his heart. If I wasn't forced, I wouldn't have come. Hearing Simon's words, he began to worry. Mike Sayer seemed to be a temperamental person. It was similar to what Yi said. This kind of guy was usually more dangerous. If it was someone else, at least for the sake of the other higher-ups who were related to him, they wouldn't go too far. Now it seemed that his amulet didn't work. His fate might be in Mike Sayer's hands. When Reynolds finally saw Mike Sayer's back, he immediately had a feeling of being suppressed by a mountain. Different from Brent's introverted nature, Mike Sayer was the complete opposite. The aura on his body was like a wave, overbearing and oppressive. He was tall and burly, at least a head taller than Reynolds. Island Master, Mr. Dennis is here. Simon bowed and then retreated. Mike Sayer slowly turned around. His eyes were radiating divine light, as if they had substance, making people feel weak from the bottom of their hearts. Anyone who saw him would never doubt that this person was definitely a hero-level powerhouse. Standing in front of Mike Sayer, Reynolds felt like a poor beggar who saw the world's richest man. He felt ashamed of his inferiority. However, he quickly adjusted his emotions and then said loudly, "I've long heard of the Island Master's name. Today, I'm fortunate to meet you. Sure enough, hearing about you can't compare to meeting you in person. Island Master, you have a dignified appearance, extraordinary heroic appearance, and dazzling radiance. Dennis's admiration for you is like a torrential river, continuous and unstoppable." Although Reynolds didn't know why Mike Sayer was looking for him, as the saying went, flattery is always effective. No matter who it was, Reynolds wouldn't hesitate to flatter him. Therefore, as soon as he saw him, Reynolds fiercely flattered him. Chapter 497. Mike Sayer's dragon's might skill to exert pressure on the other side was broken, and a smile appeared on his face. "Mr. Dennis, I can guarantee that you are definitely one of the most cunning and shameless businessmen," Reynolds modestly said. "Not at all. Island Master is overpraising me." Mike Sayer smiled again. "What? Was my words just now overflowing praise for a person?" Reynolds cheekily said, "Not for the average person, but certainly for a businessman. The wealth a businessman can have is directly proportional to his degree of cunning and shamelessness." Mike Sayer knew that if he continued to joke with him like this, they wouldn't be able to talk about business. So he restrained his smile and said, "Mr. Dennis, let's talk about my daughter, Yi." Reynolds's heart thumped. Here it comes. Mike Sayer certainly knew about the relationship between him and Yi, but how much did he know? Mike Sayer faintly said, "Mr. Dennis, you seem to have taken a few things from my treasure house with Yi, right?" Reynolds was surprised. With Yi as a spy, the matter was carried out so secretly, but he didn't expect it to be exposed. However, looking at Mike Sayer's tone, it didn't seem to be too strict. There should be a lot of room for negotiation. Reynolds scratched his head and said embarrassedly, "Island Master is really resourceful. By the way, how did you know?" Seeing Mike Sayer speak lightly, Reynolds answered even more lightly. His tone was as if he had taken something from an old friend's house and forgot to tell him. He knew that he couldn't deny it, otherwise it would be cheating and disrespectful. At that time, Mike Sayer would probably be angry. Regarding his honesty, or rather rashness, Mike Sayer was helpless. He could only be lenient and was embarrassed to deal with it seriously. Moreover, he really didn't care about those treasures. So he straightforwardly said, "Mr. Dennis, I also know about the matter between you and Yi. My daughter has always been lacking, and as her father, I can't make up for it. The medicine Mr. Dennis used is really magical." As he said this, he praised. As the head of the family with the most treasures in the world, he was at his wit's end. He didn't expect that it would be solved by a small businessman, so these words came from the heart. Reynolds was not without pride, but he modestly said, "You're too kind." Mike Sayer said, "The things you took were just a small reward, so I just turned a blind eye to it." Reynolds was overjoyed when he heard that. He thought to himself, with his words, "I'm safe now." At this moment, Mike Seal's tone changed. But the night before yesterday, Mr. Dennis's words and actions seemed to be a little out of line. The day before yesterday, Renaud was startled, and then he immediately remembered that Yi's part had already reached a certain level, which made Renaud somewhat restless. He thought that it was very safe in his perversely guarded inner court. So he jokingly used the excuse of stimulating certain parts to speed up the results to tempt Dragoness to take off her outer clothes. Unfortunately, Yi ultimately chose to use more time, and Renaud was quite regretful at that time. Mike Sayer snorted coldly and said, "I won't say anything if Yi is dating you because of business, but if Mr. Dennis still has ulterior motives." He didn't continue, but a white light flashed in the air, and then a rockery more than 10 meters away split into two halves and slid down diagonally, as smooth as tofu. Reynolds didn't even see when he made his move. What if the knife was aimed at him? There was no need to talk about the consequences. There was only one word: death. There was a knife above the character for lust. Reynolds finally understood this truth. Cold sweat rolled down his forehead as he quickly said, I won't dare again." Mike Sayer said with satisfaction, "Very good. This way everyone is happy." After the false alarm, Reynolds was still happy. He thought that he would be held responsible for stealing the treasure this time, but now it seemed that he guessed wrong. He didn't even need to return the treasure. He only needed to suppress his secretion of sex hormones when he was with Yi, and his road would be smooth and steady. "Well, there's nothing else, Mr. Dennis. Now that you are free tonight, come with me. There will be a banquet tonight, and the participants will be related to your business." The annual Catherine Trade Conference, according to the convention, was held in the capital of the trade capital Aquilan, which was also the largest island in the chain of countries, and the only super city on Spartak's road. This was an extremely large-scale trade conference that covered the entire King's Realm. There were many countries participating in this conference, which was beyond the expectations of the organizers. Other than those who applied for the qualification to participate, almost all the countries on the continent sent their own representatives. The most basic reason for this abnormal phenomenon was naturally the biggest strange event of the year: the greatly reduced growth rate of crops. Most of the countries on the continent were directly affected because of this, and some of the countries that had less land suitable for farming were even hit with a devastating blow. Aquilan was the main country that relied on seafood for food, so the degree of the impact was undoubtedly the lowest. Other than the basic needs of the people, they could still sell the remaining large amount of seafood, and exchange it for other needed items, especially weapons and armors to defend against the sea demon's attack, energy crystals to set up defensive barriers, and so on. The central location of the conference was Sydney Ken Island, an inland island on Spartax Road, an island in the middle of the island. Mr. Brian Bufelin, the vice chairman of the Great Tang Dynasty Trade Association. In the conference center, Faye Belenke simply introduced the people attending the conference. The first was the representative of the Great Tang Dynasty. After all, the Great Tang Dynasty was recognized as the most powerful and resourceful country on the continent. In the past, the representative of the Great Tang Dynasty would always be the first to be introduced as a sign of respect. Even though the Great Tang Dynasty's strength had been weakened to a certain extent after the start of the Human Civil War, overall, its position had not been shaken. The conference center could be said to be the most important venue for the trade conference. It was different from a usual place where Reynolds would visit. The conference center was a place for business and entertainment, but the conference center was purely for communication. There was no music, no erotic dancing, and no decorations. Even the layout of the conference center was simple and generous. Normal business meetings were held in other places in Sydney, so the conference center only received the representatives of the various countries and top-notch merchants. Even if Reynolds had a certain amount of fame and wealth in Ackland, that was only in comparison. Although he was a miracle in Ackland, compared to the various merchants here, there was still a huge difference. Originally, he did not have the qualifications to have a place in the conference center. However, with the recommendation of the richest family in Ackland, the Dragon King Maxell, and Ackland being the host, adding in Reynolds' huge potential, it could be said to be 1,000 miles. The chairman of the Trade Association, Faye Belenke, had specially opened a back door for him. Chapter 498. Brian stood up and slightly bowed his head in a salute. In addition to his outstanding business management ability, he was also a powerful magician, and his family background was strong. After all, a person like Guys, who only relied on the level of the beginner warrior to become the president of a joint professional guild, was a rare anomaly, one in a billion. Faye Belenke continued to read the list in his hand. Mr. Gray, I love Van, the external manager of the Mecca Empire Trade Guild. Originally, the Mecca Empire was extremely poor in terms of crops and other materials. It was only rich in ferocious magical beasts, so it couldn't stand on such a high ranking. However, it suddenly launched a war and seized most of the coastal cities of the Tang Dynasty. Its trade ability jumped rapidly, and it was only ranked behind the Tang Dynasty. Gray also stood up. It was quite dramatic. It was unknown whether it was a coincidence or a deliberate arrangement, but Brian and Gray, the two representatives of the rival empire, were actually sitting next to each other, and they were talking and laughing with the telepathy spell. At least on the surface, they were like a pair of close friends who hadn't seen each other for many years, and they were reminiscing about each other. It was a bit unbelievable. This was a strange phenomenon caused by the situation. After 2 months of fighting, both sides were evenly matched and didn't have a big advantage. If this continued, it was estimated that the winner wouldn't be decided in a short time. The most likely result was no doubt that both sides would suffer. If they still refused to give in to each other, their strength would be greatly damaged. In the end, everyone could suffer the consequences of the recent magical beast siege. When he came to Irene's dormitory, Reynolds was immediately surprised. Every student in this special class had a separate dormitory, a single room. The dormitory was 100 square meters. Bathroom, dining room, bedroom, wooden floor, all kinds of ingredients, drinks, a lot of recovery potions, clothes, and so on. Everything was available. Seeing Reynolds's envious look, Irene said helplessly, "We sold ourselves to the Tang Dynasty. Of course we have to be good to us." Reynolds sat on Irene's bed and watched Irene take out a lot of clothes from the wardrobe. He hesitated and said, "I don't want to be too eye-catching. Is there any disguise? Or makeup?" Irene nodded and said, "Of course there is. Sister Chan taught me a lot of techniques. Change into this dress first." After a long time, Erin took out a dress and handed it to Reynolds. Seeing Reynolds put on, she said, Then I will put on makeup for you. No one will recognize you. 10 minutes later, Reynolds looked at the unfamiliar face in the mirror. It was a young man of about 18 years of age. The skin from his face to his neck had been darkened by Aaron's paint. His appearance was completely different from before. In fact, the silhouette didn't change at all. It was just an illusion created by Irene's skillful hands. Reynolds' eyebrows were sharper and thicker than before. They were less gloomy and more handsome. The fake mustache above his lips added a sense of maturity. Coupled with his tuxedo-like attire and his height, Reynolds actually looked quite handsome. Irene's eyes sparkled as she looked at him. Not to mention acquaintances. Even Reynolds himself couldn't recognize her. Thus, he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration, "Linger is really amazing." Aaron nodded. She looked at her work and praised, "Not bad. You really look like a charming little brother when you dress up like this." Reynolds smiled and said, "You're too kind. Don't I usually look like this?" Aaron rolled her eyes at Reynolds. This little Lin really didn't know what modesty was. Thankfully, Reynolds added, "Of course, it's not without my little Linger's skillful hands." Aaron smiled shyly and said, "Reynolds, you have to have a good face shape first. I only did a little bit of work." Reynolds looked at Aaron's blushing face and was very happy. He couldn't help but say, "Linger, you look very cute today." Aaron snorted and said, "You don't have to say that." Along the way, Aaron kept reminding Reynolds about some things he had to pay attention to at the banquet. For example, he couldn't swagger when walking. He had to walk in small steps and not swing his hands too much. When standing, he had to hold his head high and maintain a smile on his face to show his confidence and joy at being able to attend the banquet. He couldn't look around. If he wanted to see something, he had to twist his body to the front and not twist his head. Reynolds' head hurt from listening. This was definitely taught by Diao Chan. There were too many rules. He didn't know if he could remember them all. The two of them rode on the Earth Dragon carriage and arrived at the banquet venue in less than an hour. After the two of them got off the carriage, a beast tamer immediately came to receive them. The transportation in this area was all free. The beast tamers were all hired by the city. After more than 10 minutes, the two of them arrived in front of a vast and exceptionally gorgeous villa. The lights were bright, and it was extraordinarily lively. There were more and more celebrities. It was obvious that they had arrived at their destination. At this moment, Reynolds felt like he was a goose that had walked into a flock of cranes. Although he looked like a crane after dressing up, he was still a goose in the end. It was impossible to change. He felt a little uneasy. At this moment, Aaron's slender arms had already passed through the crook of his arm and were intertwined. This was a necessary etiquette for entering the banquet. Aaron's towering chest unavoidably pressed against Reynolds' arm. Reynolds immediately felt his face turn red. He felt rather uncomfortable. Walking through a long corridor at the entrance, their eyes suddenly opened up. This was a large courtyard that looked like a small plaza. A large number of waitresses were carrying plates and moving around busily. The food and drinks in their hands were all available to be enjoyed at will. All kinds of celebrities were gathered in groups of 3 or 4 to chat. Aaron nodded and smiled when she met others. However, she didn't stop because she had to greet the host first to show her respect. And Reynolds could only follow suit. He felt like he was no different from a prostitute. Suddenly, his arm tightened. Reynolds didn't know what had happened. He followed Aaron's gaze and looked to the other side. It was a young man dressed in black. He was about 18 or 19 years old. His face was handsome, his figure tall and straight. His bearing was also very elegant. He was a very charming man. Many unmarried, noble ladies surrounded him, hoping to gain his favor. The man smiled as he dealt with them. His behavior was very decent, but his eyes were like an eagle's. Reynolds always felt that he looked familiar. When a man saw Aaron, he said, "Excuse me." He escaped from the encirclement of the girls and stopped in front of the two of them. He smiled and said, "Aaron, long time no see." Reynolds took a look. Wasn't this the night of Leon who had knocked him unconscious with his punishment a few days ago? Chapter 499. Aaron also had a smile on her face, but what she said almost made Reynolds laugh to death. "Leon, you're not dead yet?" Leon still maintained his smile. Thanks to Miss Erin, I'm still alive and well. To be able to maintain his composure after receiving such a vicious curse. This person's scheming was obviously very deep. It was the first time Reynolds met such a person since he came to King's Mainland. He couldn't help but take a few more glances at him, but he didn't know what kind of conflict there was between Erin and him. Erin smiled even sweeter. That's good, but life is unpredictable. Mr. Leon, you have to be careful at all times, every day. If you do too many guilty things, it's easy to be unlucky. You might even fall to your death while walking. No matter how deep Leon's smile was, he couldn't smile anymore. A cold light flashed in his eyes, full of resentment. Erin no longer paid attention to him and pulled Reynolds straight over. Because Reynolds was wearing a hermit's cloak last time, Leon didn't recognize that Reynolds was the one who knocked him out. The host of tonight's banquet was the owner of Tang Dynasty's famous consumer bank, Duo. Almost all business and trade were under his jurisdiction. He had great power and could be said to be one of the top figures in society. Duo was a middle-aged man in his 60s. Flushed with success, he raised his cup and enjoyed the blessings of every guest. Erin and Reynolds came in front of him and bowed slightly. Mr. Duo, thank you for your invitation. Let Erin have a pleasant night. Mr. Dennis. Reynolds, who had just finished another business, let out a sigh of relief and once again put on a professional smile. He turned his head and saw two men, one fat and one thin, from the Big Ear clan. Parker, Mr. Pei. Because these two people's big ears were very similar to Zhu Beiji in Journey to the West, Reynolds had a deep impression of them. They were a pair of twin brothers. The one with the big belly was the older brother, Parker, while the one who was as skinny as a bamboo pole was the younger brother, Pai. They were involved in the business of treasures, which included the expensive medicinal pills. Reynolds remembered that he had talked to them before, and they were very happy. They were very satisfied with the terms of the deal. He didn't know why they were looking for him again. Parker was all smiles as he said, Mr. Dennis, it's getting late. I can see that you're quite tired. Why don't we find a place to have some fun and relax? Payne added, Yes, Mr. Dennis. I heard that Spartax's Punglai night is very famous. You can find pretty girls from all over the continent there. If you're interested, you can even spend a night there. Obviously, this was what the man liked. Reynolds said without hesitation, Parker, Mr. Payne, then Dennis will bask in your glory. Go and enjoy yourself. Have a wonderful and unforgettable night, hee. Reynolds didn't refuse, because he really needed something to relieve his stress. Otherwise, he would collapse in half a month. No problem. Our brothers will pay the bill. Have fun, Mr. Dennis. Parker and Pai said at the same time. If he could have a good relationship with this merchant who was in possession of rare goods, he would have an unstoppable source of income in the future. Thinking of the gold coins flowing into their pockets like water, the two brothers from the Big Ear race became extremely excited. They laughed together with Reynolds, looking extremely wretched, like three male dogs in heat. Therefore, the business was temporarily abandoned. In the ambiguous topic of purely exchanging the experience between men, the three perverts who shared the same bad taste rushed to Punglai Night Capital, the most famous nightlife place in the super city. One of the moons on the king's realm had already set in the east. The remaining white light lingered on the horizon reluctantly. Meanwhile, the other moon and star were in the middle of the sky. It was the middle of the night, which was equivalent to midnight on Earth. To the upper echelons who were used to enjoying themselves, nightlife had just begun. Punglai River was located in the middle of Spartax's Love District. It spanned 1,000 meters and was spacious. Countless flower boats of various sizes filled the river, and stars adorned the surface of the river. The river wasn't turbulent and flowed slowly. It was so peaceful that it was like an unmarried virgin. Under the moonlight, it was like silk, extremely beautiful. From time to time, a few small flying fishes would jump out of the water, adding some vitality to the mirror-like river. The fresh and comfortable river breeze was mixed with the smell of beautiful women's rouge. The wonderful music of string songs and dances floated to the shore, making people's spirits rise. As soon as they reached the river bank, A beast tamer rode a water demon to pick them up. The two brothers, Parker and Pi, had participated in the trade fair before, so they were familiar with Penglai Night Capital. They immediately said the name of a flower boat, and the beast tamer quickly commanded the water demon to swim to the place they said. Penglai Night Capital's business was extremely good on weekdays, and this night, it was even more bustling. Merchants from all over the continent, other than those who had obtained the qualifications for the trade fair, also came uninvited. They brought people to Spartax's Road to look for opportunities, and this place was undoubtedly a good place to build connections. Therefore, there were countless flower boats of various sizes. However, most of them were fully occupied, and the sounds of cups clinking could be heard one after another. The water demon stopped under a huge flower boat. Unlike most of the other luxurious decorations that were decorated with jewelry, silk, and satin, and filled with the stench of money, this boat was more simple and elegant. However, it was located in a golden position in the middle of the river, and it was made of rare high-quality Nammu wood, so it must be extraordinary and superior. When Reynolds first came to the king's realm, he always felt that those magic lamps floating high in the air were very special. However, after seeing many of them, he eventually felt that it was dull. This flower boat was different. Its lighting tools were purely the most primitive lanterns, which are similar to those on Earth. At this time, Reynolds felt that it was extremely novel. A turtle man with a mustache on his upper lip immediately came to welcome them. This was the real definition of a pimp, responsible for pimping. The turtle man nodded and bowed and said politely, "Welcome, distinguished guests. I wonder if you have already booked a room in advance?" Parker nodded. Room 902. They had already prepared for tonight. If they hadn't booked a room in advance, it would have been overcrowded. "Oh, okay. Everyone, please follow me." After bowing, the turtle man led the way under 1,000 faces, while the three of them followed closely behind. Standing on the deck, Reynolds realized that this flower boat was astonishingly big. Just its width alone was 60 meters, and its length was 500 meters. It was like a small aircraft carrier. The center of the boat wasn't an ordinary room with a flat roof, but a steeple. It had a total of 18 floors and stood tall, standing out among the many boats. Different from ordinary steeples, this steeple had a center as its axis, and many branching passageways extended out of thin air. They reached dozens of meters away, and connected to the end of the branch was a large room. It looked like a flying saucer in an amusement park, and it looked very thrilling. Chapter 500. Faint light seeped out from the windows of every room, accompanied by melodious music. At the top, there were 4 dazzling words on the signboard: 18 heavens. Taking a closer look, the 4 words seemed to be formed by round pearls, and there was a faint rustling sound coming from them. From a flickering and changing of the stars and the faint rustling sounds, it seemed to be something Reynolds had seen before: dream beads. Of course, they couldn't all be the top-grade beads that Dragon Lady Yi had obtained at the auction. However, it was rare to see so many dream beads, and they all looked to be more than 300 to 400 years old. Parker looked at Reynolds, who was looking left and right like a newbie, and said proudly, "Mr. Dennis, is this your first time here?" 18 Heavens is one of the most famous flower boats in Penglai. It's famous because of its 18-story tower. We're lucky to be able to book a room on the 9th floor. Reynolds laughed involuntarily. He had only heard of the 18 levels of hell, but he didn't expect there to be 18 heavens in the king's realm. Pi explained, there are a total of 18 elegant rooms on the first floor of 18 heavens. For every floor, there's one room. Every floor has different types of programs and beauties, especially on the 18th floor, where there's only one room. It's said that the level of luxury is unimaginable, and there are countless exciting programs. It's a pity that we've only heard of it and don't have the right to see it for ourselves. However, Mr. Dennis doesn't need to feel regretful. There are already quite a few programs on the 9th floor. I'm sure Mr. Dennis will be overwhelmed and forget to return. Hee. The people from this world really knew how to have fun. Reynolds said, then I'll wait and see. The turtle man led the three of them to the bottom of the tower. Then, the three pretty maids at the door bowed slightly. Ai Fu, Fan Lien, Michelle. We're honored to be able to serve our esteemed guests. Parker explained, Mr. Dennis, these are the maids who will be our personal commentators for all the programs tonight. They're also called Yume. Other than commentating, they can also do anything for you. They've been trained for a long time and know a lot. They're very exciting. Reynolds looked at them impudently and slapped her butt. Beauties, are you really that amazing? Michelle was the most classy of the three. It was obvious that Parker and Pi had specially given her to Reynolds in order to please him. Mr. Dennis, you're so naughty, Michelle said shyly. Two red clouds actually appeared on her face, as if she was really shy. Reynolds had to admit, whether she was pretending or not, that shy and coy look evoked his desire. Payne laughed. Mr. Dennis, don't be fooled by her appearance. You won't even know what's going on if she eats you. The three women protested coquettishly, but their faces were full of innocence. Although they were all on the 9th floor of the tower, the services in the 9 rooms were different. If it was mainly for business reasons, or if it was just to enjoy singing and dancing, then the maids and programs arranged would be different. The Parker brothers were here purely to have fun. They chose the most exciting type, and even the waitresses were very slutty. Smiling sweetly, the 3 seductive beauties led Reynolds and the others up the spiral staircase to the 9th floor. The walkway was actually made of jasper, and the handrails were made of white jade. Elegance and luxury coexisted. Once they entered the room, Reynolds realized that this was a 2-way sound barrier room. Reynolds took in a deep breath. It seemed like it was going to be a night of debauchery. The room was decorated very magnificently, forming a stark contrast with the elegant exterior of the ship. Pink lanterns, pink carpet, pink gauze curtains, pink walls. Everything in sight exuded a certain atmosphere, ambiguity. The stage was circular and was set in the center of the room. It was about 300 square meters and 10 meters tall. The space was enough for the dancers to dance to their heart's content. 3 long mattresses were evenly distributed at a 60-degree angle to the stage. They were naturally the seats for Reynolds and the others. There was a protruding blue button on the right side of the table. The curious Reynolds pressed it lightly. Then, a crystal hanging 5 meters above his head spat out a small black light screen. It extended out like a piece of cloth, completely enveloping Reynolds and the table. This was a 1-way sound barrier. The people outside couldn't see the people inside the barrier and their voices. Of course, they wouldn't know what they were doing inside. Pressing the button again, the black light screen quickly disappeared and the barrier was removed. There were several pots of sea orchids on the windowsill. The room was filled with the smell of perfume, whetting one's appetite. Parker and his brother couldn't help but touch Yume's body. However, they didn't go overboard because the best part was yet to come. If they were to indulge too much now, it would be like Zhu Beiji eating ginseng fruit. It wouldn't be tasty at all. Although their big ears were very similar to Zhu Beiji's, their wisdom and patience were worlds apart. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to become successful businessmen. Reynolds hugged his Yume and sat down on the soft mattress without standing on ceremony. The table in front of them was already filled with a dazzling array of delicacies. There were fruits and seafood, fragrant wine, and other entertainment for the guests. The door was locked tightly, and there seemed to be no opening around the walls. Also, knowing that this room was suspended in midair, how did the performers get in? Just as Reynolds was feeling puzzled, the stage lit up and a white pillar of light soared into the sky. Then, the figures of 12 white-clothed women suddenly appeared in front of everyone like a mirage. They gradually became clearer, and when the white light dissipated, they had become real people. Reynolds was enlightened. So it was a transmission array. Damn it, it was indeed extravagant. The performers were actually using a small transmission array to kill a chicken with a butcher's knife. They were making a mountain out of a molehill. Of course, the guest's interest was also proportional to the rarity of the item. The boss of 18 Heavens understood people's psychology very well, so he spared no expense for this. Raging flames shot out from dozens of small holes around the stage. Under the light of the flames, the 12 white-clothed women took off their clothes. Their hair, eyebrows, pupils, faces, lips, nails, and every part of their bodies were snow white. There was even a faint cold mist coming from their bodies. The entire stage. Not long after, the entire room was covered in mist. The mist lingered, and the entire room was like the moon palace where Chang-Yi lived. It was actually slightly cold. It was different from the usual dancers who smiled sweetly to win the favor of the guests. Their beautiful faces were as cold as ice, and they were extremely arrogant. In contrast to their demeanor, the translucent white clothes on their bodies were faintly discernible, and they were extremely sexy and alluring. Smart women knew that showing 70% of their bodies was the most alluring, and it was even more intimidating than being completely naked. Moreover, their cold and elegant appearance could easily attract men to conquer them. Chapter 501. This appetizer was not bad. Reynolds felt that he was in a daze, but he didn't lose his composure. The table was semicircular, surrounding the two people on the couch. The Parker brothers and the white-clothed woman, who were more than 20 meters away, couldn't see too much. However, with them present, they were secretly playing tricks on the couch, which was obviously a lot more exciting. Melodious music floated in the air. It was refreshing and natural. The lady in white danced along with it. The satin in her hands fluttered, making her look like a fairy. Although she was teasing, Michelle still had to do her job. She rubbed her hands on Reynolds's legs and said, "Mr. Dennis, this dance is called Goddess Longs for Mortals. As the name suggests, it's about a young goddess in the heavens who fell in love and came down to the mortal world to find her ideal husband." Michelle didn't explain much. There was no point in explaining too much. She mainly left it for the audience to figure out. Reynolds nodded. Yes, yes. However, his eyes didn't leave the dancers in front of him. Michelle pursed her lips and smiled. That's right, but I have to remind Mr. Dennis that these are all beauties of the Frost tribe. Their bodies are naturally cold, especially that part of their bodies. It might freeze you to death. Reynolds's eyes widened. No way. There's such a thing? Wouldn't that kill me? Michelle giggled. If you don't believe me, Mr. Dennis can try it later. Reynolds sat on the seat of the train and watched with interest as a rather cute young lady played with her mobile phone opposite him. Since there were only a few people in the carriage and it was empty, Reynolds could only look at her. She had long hair that draped over her shoulders, a delicate and cute face, and ample breasts. Her legs, which were clad in white silk, were crossed together. She should be a torturous little vixen. Although she was wearing headphones, he could tell that this lady was playing Mobile Legends. When did this Li Bai come? Damn, why did I die again? Oh, brotherly Bai, let me go QEQ. It's my first time playing Sun Shang Xiang. I tricked you, sorry. Furthermore, Reynolds had confirmed 3 things. First, she was playing Sun Shang Xiang. Second, she was playing the game with her voice turned on. Third, the game was over. Reynolds couldn't help but smile when he saw the young lady put down her phone and let out a long sigh. Her face was filled with hidden bitterness. I don't believe it. Seeing that she had started another round, Reynolds shook his head and reminded her, hey, the train in front has to pass through a cave, and there's also a large area of wilderness. There won't be any signal, so it's best not to play. Apparently, this young lady did not expect Reynolds to speak to her. At this moment, he only glanced at Reynolds with slight surprise. Reynolds also knew that he wasn't the kind of person who looked handsome at first glance. Reynolds knew what he looked like. She had expected his reaction, so Reynolds didn't say anything. He just gave her a kind reminder. What happened after that had nothing to do with him, but I've already opened it. Unexpectedly, the young lady didn't ignore Reynolds. Instead, she pitifully said another sentence. Reynolds looked at her in surprise. She thought that Reynolds didn't believe her, so she got up and sat beside him, holding the phone in front of him. You see, this is a promotion match. You're only 1 star away from Diamond. You can't lose. What came to his face was a faint fragrance on her body. It was the lemon smell that Reynolds liked. Moreover, it turned out to be an iPhone fork. This young lady is quite rich. Reynolds looked at the screen and silently complained his heart. Which character is you? Reynolds looked at the game loading interface and asked. Irene. It's that Wang Zhaojun. Irene? Reynolds took the phone and looked at the screen. Wang Zhaojun was wearing the eye and a singer skin. The nickname below was indeed Irene, and there was an eye-catching Aristocratic 8 logo next to it. What a rich girl, Reynolds thought to himself. Aristocratic 8 seemed to cost 5,000 yuan. For a poor college student like him, who only lived on 1,000 yuan a month, it was really a big gap. Reynolds asked casually, Irene, Miss Irene, is that your real name? Yes, yes. Is there a problem? Looking at the young lady's puzzled face, Reynolds couldn't help but smile. He didn't expect that there would be people who used their own names in this game. What's wrong? What are you smiling about? Reynolds said, I'm smiling. Your lineup is sure to win. You have Wang Zhaojun as the mid laner, Lanling Wang as the jungler, Zhang Fei as the support, Neza as the top laner, and Di Renjia as the bottom laner. This lineup not only has super gank ability, but also super survival ability. Clearing his throat, Reynolds continued, Look at the lineup on the other side. Daji as the mid laner, Han Xian as the jungler, Bianca as the support, Huang Zhong as the archer, and Kyo Tachibana as the top laner. They were practically a kitchen knife team. This kind of team had a high tolerance for mistakes. Moreover, most of them were heroes in the early stages of the game. None of them were tanks in the later stages of the game. All we had to do was to target Huang Zhong and make sure that he didn't dare to set up cannon. However, we have to be careful of Bianca in the early game. This season, Bianca's early game damage is number 1. No one can beat him. Reynolds wanted to continue, but he glanced at Irene, who was sitting beside him, and realized that she was looking at him with stars in her eyes. You're so good. What's your rank in Challenger? Do you still need a disciple? Reynolds looked at Irene's admiring eyes and smiled. My rank is only Star Glory 1. Like you, I'm 1 star away from promotion. You're so good, QAQ. After this round, can we add each other as friends? Looking at Irene's expectant eyes, Reynolds could only nod. He had to admit that the loading speed of the iPhone was really fast. He was the first one to reach 100%. Welcome to Challenger's Glory. With a mechanical female voice, the game officially started. Reynolds also focused on controlling Wang Zhaojun to start the game. Lanling Wang, leave a red for me. Di Renjia, no. Lanling Wang, F*CKU. Han Xian on the other side. I'm here to kill a bunch of teammates. Bianca on the other side. Welfare Bureau. Reynolds didn't care about these words. He just laughed and didn't do anything. First, he bought a pair of shoes that cost 250 gold coins and walked to the bushes on the right side of the middle lane. One had to know that the 3 bitches of the grass were not called for nothing. Daji, Angela, and Wang Zhaojun were 3 heroes who loved to squat in the grass to ambush others. Often, they could take down a hero on the other side with 1 set of skills. Then, they would hide in the grass, hide their achievements and reputation, and prepare to ambush the next person. Chapter 502. Reynolds knew this very well. Since he had bought the shoes, he would definitely reach the bushes before Daji and get the chance to attack first. As expected, Daji was late. She hid under the tower and waited for a while. After confirming that there was no one around, she carefully came over to clear the troops. Reynolds hid in the bushes and watched Daji clear the troops while keeping an eye on the enemy hero. Hit her! Hit her! Aaron could not help but urge him. Reynolds shook his head and said, Don't rush. Wait until Daji uses at least one of her skills. You have to use all of Wang Zhaojun's skills. Oh, Aaron heard this and obediently shut her mouth. Reynolds walked back and forth in the bushes. When he saw Daji use a skill, he quickly swiped the screen with his right hand and used a second skill at Daji's feet. Reynolds' right hand quickly attacked Daji as he walked towards her. Daji's health bar was dropping as speed visible to the naked eye. Reynolds had already controlled Wang Zhaojun to walk in front of Daji, almost touching her face. At this time, Daji's frozen status had been removed. She was in a panic and did not have the heart to fight back. She was afraid that someone would sneak up on her and kept retreating. Reynolds had also reached level 2. He immediately used a skill. Shattered ice flowers bloomed under Dodgy's feet, and Dodgy's speed was reduced instantly. Reynolds's right hand did not stop and continued to attack her. Dodgy's health was already reduced by more than half. Dodgy had no choice but to use a second skill and hit Wang Zhaojun. Crack! The shield on Wang Zhaojun's body exploded instantly. At the same time, Dodgy's health was reduced to a critical level. Flash! Dodgy was forced to use Flash by Reynolds. While Wang Zhaojun was temporarily stunned, she immediately went under the tower. Reynolds did not care. His right hand also used Flash. A thin golden light flashed. Just as Reynolds was about to use Flash to take the first hit, a red 460 delay appeared on the top right corner of his phone. There's no signal. We should be entering the cave soon. Reynolds frowned as he put down his phone and said to Erin. Erin stomped her feet and said angrily, "Broken signal. That was such a cool maneuver just now. How come there's no signal? So infuriating." Reynolds smiled and said, "Don't worry, it's okay to lose this game. Let's add each other as friends later, and I can carry you in the future." Reynolds naturally wouldn't reject such a beautiful girl. Maybe they could develop some ambiguous things in the future. Erin became happy after hearing Reynolds' words. The train entered the cave at this time, and the carriage immediately became incomparably dark. Although there was light, it was still very depressing. The two of them chatted as they waited for their phones to receive a signal. Reynolds found out that Irene was a university student just like him. She was also taking the train home because of the winter break. The two of them quickly became familiar with each other and memorized each other's phone numbers. By this time, the train had already left the cave, but the scenery outside the window was getting more and more desolate. Although it was daytime, Reynolds could feel a chilling aura. Moreover, the train had already left the cave for quite a while, and there was still no signal. He didn't even have 2G, let alone 4G. It directly showed that it was not within the range of receiving information. Reynolds felt a little strange. After all, he often took this train home, so he was very clear about whether there was a signal on the road or not. Just as he was feeling strange, Irene patted him and asked carefully, "Did you notice that these two trains are getting slower and slower?" Reynolds was startled and looked out of the window. The train was really getting slower and slower. The two of them looked at each other and looked at the scenery outside the window. Their expressions became more and more frightened, because unknowingly, it was no longer the wilderness outside the window. Instead, it was a large pile of broken corpses. Reynolds asked curiously, "Who is it? Could it be that butterfly demon?" "Haha, then come to my room tonight. Let's have a good chat." After saying that, he smiled and was very happy. The cold butterfly demon girl from before walked over and deliberately pulled the hem of her short skirt, revealing a white and tender thigh, and said teasingly, "Okay, Mr. Dennis. Unfortunately, that person is not me." Thinking of the kind of night he spent in 18 Heavens, Reynolds' mouth was a little dry. How come after not seeing them for more than 10 days, they were all so proactive? Black Face Ghost. Reynolds could tell who it was just by this name. Sure enough, Yi flew out of the courtyard the next moment. He said to the girls, "Linger, you can go and cook first." The girls knew that he had something to discuss with Yi in private, so they all left first. Yi quickly arrived in front of him and anxiously said, "You're back. I was worried to death." Reynolds thought to himself, "What are you worried about? Father isn't your husband. Look, I've become a lot smaller," she said as she stuck out her chest, showing it to Reynolds. Reynolds almost fell down. This kind of woman was really rare. If her father wasn't Mike Searle, he would have given her away sooner or later. He knew that this was a normal reaction from medicine, so he casually said, "Don't make a fuss. I'll give you some medicine and you'll be fine." Yi heard that she wouldn't return to her original form and let out a big sigh of relief. Reynolds' heart skipped a beat. "That's right, Miss Yi. Is there any way to become an Ackland citizen, get an occupation badge, and get a high-level position?" Yi said in a surprised voice, "You still want power?" Reynolds laughed. "No matter what, I'm still a person with a bit of fame, but I don't even have an occupation badge in Ackland. That's a bit embarrassing. Yi didn't have any schemes and didn't doubt it. There is. The first is to make a large contribution to the empire, so you can get a high-level position. The second is to participate in Ackland's annual sea hunt. Sea hunt? Yi said with a nod. That's right. The sea hunt is also a tradition of our empire. Because Ackland is a trading country, the smell of commercialization is too strong. In order to prevent people's sense of martial arts from being weakened, the empire will hold some competitions each year. The sea hunt is the most important one and lasts for a month, like a festival. Warriors that perform well in the sea hunt will be used by the empire. Seeing a glimmer of hope, Reynolds was very excited as he asked, "What's the specific content?" Listening to the name, it doesn't seem like a duel between warriors, right? Yi shook her head. No, it's hunting demonic sea beasts. Reynolds was a bit scared when he heard this. Fierce beasts. Isn't that dangerous? Of course it is. Chapter 503. Ferocious beasts were also a type of magical beast, but they were much more ferocious than ordinary magical beasts and had a violent temperament. The glove, nimble movement that the pervert Philip had given him, which could greatly increase the speed at which he released spiritual power, was made from the belly of sea demon bandies. It was a pity that too many people had seen it in the Academy tournament, so he could not use it again. Otherwise, his identity would be easily exposed. Townsend rolled her eyes. Nonsense. Do you think it's as simple as killing 2 water arrow prawns? If it was easy, it wouldn't climb up already. Seeing Reynolds shrink back, she gave a snort and said, "Black-faced ghost. If you're afraid, then give up on the idea and obediently be a profiteer." Ever since he had been chased, Reynolds' desire to win had become very strong. Hearing Townsend say that he was a coward, his heart filled with anger. But he said with a faint smile, "Who says I'm afraid? Miss Townsend, how about you give me some pointers and see if I have the qualifications?" Townsend said without any hesitation, "All right." She was thinking that this black-faced ghost actually dared to take the initiative to challenge her. Let this miss show off a few moves and scare him until he loses control of his body. Otherwise, who knows what an expert is? Speaking of which, she was not one of those vicious female demons who relied on the old man's power. She was very strong and was very famous in Ackland. Her family's most famous blood inheritance, true dragon spirit energy, had already reached the 5th layer. She was one of the top figures of the younger generation. She proudly said, "You just came back, so you must be very tired. To be fair, you should rest for a night. Let's fight tomorrow. I'll definitely make you convinced." Reynolds laughed. "All right, then it's settled." Townsend thought of something and quickly said, "After you lose, you can't hold a grudge and you can't do anything to the medicine you gave me." She was quite bad *SS, directly giving Reynolds a death sentence. Reynolds laughed. "Okay, do I look like that kind of person to you?" Townsend said with a frown. "Okay." Reynolds explained, "It means there's no problem." Therefore, the duel between the two was decided just like that. In order to let more people see his little brat, Townsend spread the news to everyone at night. He told Irene, Helena, and the other girls, and asked them to go and watch the show. Reynolds didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Speaking of which, it would be embarrassing to lose in front of Aaron, who had always admired him. He knew that Townsend was very powerful. Since he couldn't use the upgraded version of his innate skill in Randolph Stormkill, there was an 80% to 90% chance that he would lose. The next morning, they went to the tunnel stadium in the city and rented the most powerful spirit-suppressing barrier. As long as it was activated, the power of the people inside the barrier would be reduced to 1/10 of their normal power, but the toughness would not change. This way, they could effectively prevent casualties. Of course, the rent was also very expensive. The fee was calculated in seconds because maintaining this barrier required too much crystal stone energy. As soon as Reynolds stepped into the spirit-suppressing barrier, he felt a heavy pressure invading his body from all directions. In fact, it wasn't the gravity that increased, but the spiritual power in his body was greatly suppressed. Only people who were used to power would have an illusion. Townsend was very confident. In her eyes, Reynolds could only be the one being taken advantage of. Thinking of how she was taken advantage of by his gaze during the breast enhancement process, she had to take revenge now. There were only Irene and Helena in the audience, and they were the two people that Reynolds trusted the most. If they chose the Tunnel Stadium, they would be able to avoid Mac's cell surveillance to a certain extent. Reynolds also secretly asked Irene to set up a large number of scouting puppets to ensure that nothing would go wrong. For the sake of fairness, both of them wore Taoist robes with the same defensive power. They were barefoot and had wide sleeves, and they looked a bit like karate practitioners on Earth. Townsend was quite handsome and cool, and she looked like a domineering flower. Conquering such a woman was the most interesting, but it was a pity that even someone as bold as Reynolds didn't dare to do it, because she wasn't an ordinary woman. Her father could consign him to eternal damnation at any time. Lin Ling and the other girls were watching the battle with great interest in their seats on the side of the double barrier. Although they also knew that Reynolds, who couldn't show his true strength, didn't have a high chance of winning, he had always had a lot of strange tricks, and no one dared to predict the result. Townsend didn't use the bone whip as a weapon. She was barehanded, and her Taoist robes fluttered without wind. Her eyes were shining with golden light. This was the sign of the second level of the true dragon's spiritual power, the fearless golden dragon. This was the limit of what she could do under the spirit-suppressing barrier. Townsend didn't know how to hide her strength and bide her time. She just wanted to defeat Reynolds in one fell swoop. She quickly got into position. "Let's start." Reynolds laughed and said, "Don't worry, I'll do some preparatory exercises first." Then he slowly twisted his neck and loosened his bones and joints, but there was an endless kacha sound. He hadn't fought for a long time, and his body was almost rusty. Townsend was obviously an impatient person. Seeing that he was slow, she kept urging, "Blackface, hurry up, hurry up." However, Reynolds was very patient with the prelude. After nearly 5 minutes, he finally stood up. Townsend said helplessly, "Is this okay?" "Okay." Reynolds also got into position. He didn't like to use weapons, so naturally he was barehanded. Townsend heard this and raised the true dragon's spiritual power again. The golden light in her eyes reappeared. "Blackface, be careful." "All right." Reynolds suddenly made a stop gesture. "I have a question." Townsend was startled, and the spiritual power in her body faded again. "What?" Reynolds said unhurriedly. "We have to agree on the rules." Townsend was obviously a violent person. "What rules?" "Whoever falls down and can't get up loses." Reynolds smiled and said, "If I go too far and get injured by you, Miss Townsend, I won't be able to recover in 8 to 10 days. It doesn't matter if it affects the business, but what if I can't refine the medicine you need?" Townsend thought for a moment and realized that it made sense. "Then tell me what you want." "First of all, if you fall out of the arena, you lose immediately. Second, you can use any combat methods and attacks without any restrictions. Third, if either party admits defeat, the other party can't continue the battle." These 3 rules were almost all unfair rules that Renaud had personally set for himself. If he fought them head-on, he would lose without a doubt, and the chances of Townsend being kicked out of the arena would be much higher, just like in the battle with Washlaki. If he admitted defeat verbally, he would be able to avoid getting hurt. Reynolds knew that he couldn't hurt Townsend, and he knew that. Townsend said without thinking, Okay. I'll do as you say. Is that all?" "That's right." Chapter 504. All right, then let's begin. Townsend began to use her true dragon spiritual energy again. It was a pity that Reynolds stopped her once again. Townsend was about to faint. Her aura had been interrupted 3 times, so she was very annoyed. "What is it now?" Reynolds giggled as he said, "It's too boring to fight like this without any stakes. How about we make a bet?" Townsend saw that her hormones were about to go out of control. "What bet?" "Miss Townsend, if you lose, you'll have to ask your father to recommend me to the sea hunt." This was because Reynolds had heard from her that for outsiders without Aquilan nationality to participate in the sea hunt, there had to be someone who could recommend them. Townsend never thought that she would lose to this black-faced ghost. She didn't even ask what Reynolds would do if he lost, and immediately agreed. All right. Then when she mentioned the true dragon spiritual energy for the fourth time, she swore that if Reynolds talked like a girl again, she would beat him up without a care for anything else. But this time it really began, and Reynolds had achieved his goal. Fighting was the same as fighting. 1 would be fierce, 2 would be exhausted, and 3 would be weak. Townsend's aura and fighting spirit had already been blocked, so she wasn't as fierce as before. With her condition dropping, the strength she could use would also decrease, so Reynolds' chances of winning would be much higher. With a thought, spiritual energy surged through his body, and Reynolds changed from his usual wretched appearance to a majestic one. Looking at Reynolds, who seemed like a different person, Townsend thought to herself, "This black-faced ghost actually has some strength. No wonder he dared to challenge me. But this young miss is stronger." Her slender feet stomped on the ground, and she flew straight up. 2 golden dragon heads with their mouths wide open appeared in her hands. She slammed them towards Reynolds with a faint dragon roar that could shake one's mind. Reynolds used his most proficient spiritual energy weapon, a fire hammer, to smash the dragon heads. With a quang sound, Reynolds' fire hammer shattered, and the dragon heads only paused for a moment before continuing forward. This move was called Frightening Dragon Slaps the Shore, and could shatter metal and stone. Even if Reynolds' spiritual energy weapon's elemental density was unparalleled in the world, he still couldn't contend against it. Reynolds had already expected this result and immediately retreated. With one strike, Townsend was very proud. A golden light flashed from her, but it was a dragon tail. It wasn't a part of Townsend's body, but rather something formed from spiritual energy. Reynolds fled to the left, but when Townsend caught up, he quickly turned to the right, trying to use inertia to shake her off. However, the dragon tail beneath Townsend's feet also swayed along with it. In an instant, he had already urgently changed directions and continued to chase after Reynolds. The Dragon Clan's light body technique was also very famous. This move, called Divine Dragon Swings its tail, could change direction very quickly. It was very difficult for the opponent to get rid of it, and it was very easy for the opponent to be suppressed to the point of suffocation. Although Townsend was impulsive and hot-tempered, he was a smart man in battle. He knew that Reynolds' spiritual power was not as good as his, so he used Frightening Dragon Slaps the Shore and Divine Dragon Swings its tail to force Reynolds to fight. It was also a common tactic for the strong to bully the weak, just like Vashlaki. Reynolds was flustered, and after a while, intentionally or unintentionally, he retreated to the edge of the arena. Townsend was not stupid. He hesitated for a moment. Could it be that his opponent wanted to lure him to the side of the field, dodge in a hurry, and then knock him out from behind? However, Townsend soon let go of her worries because she had absolute confidence in her light body technique and spiritual power. At least, she wouldn't lose to this black-faced ghost. Reynolds stretched out a fire sword in each hand and cut down the golden dragon head in the dragon girl's hand. Townsend was overjoyed when he saw this. This black-faced ghost was really stupid. He knew that it was an egg hitting a rock, but he still did such a stupid thing. If he dodged, there was at least a 10% chance. The dragon head in her hand continued to hit Reynolds' shoulder. She didn't dare to attack his chest, so as not to injure him seriously. Reynolds showed a sinister smile. When the fire sword was about to collide with the dragon head, it quickly softened and then turned into a fire whip. It wrapped around Townsend's wrist and pulled up forcefully. Townsend's Frightening Dragon Slaps the Shore flew over Reynolds' left and right shoulders. Townsend was caught off guard by this strange move. The middle door was wide open, and she couldn't stop it. She crashed straight over in a scream. She reacted fast enough. She immediately covered her whole body with the golden body protection dragon aura, trying to knock Reynolds out of the field. Reynolds let go of the whip in his hand, but grabbed her right arm and turned around. His back was to Townsend. It was a taboo in battle to give one's back to the enemy like this. It was the first time Townsend had seen such a strange move. However, she soon found out the role of this move, borrowing force to fight force. Spirit bind shoulder throw. In the spinning sky and earth, Townsend's strength was used by Reynolds instead. In the spinning sky and earth, she fell out of the field with 3 slow ropes tied to her body. She didn't know when Reynolds got them. It was well known that protective spiritual power was much weaker than ordinary skills in defense of binding skills. In addition, Reynolds' slow ropes were made of super condensed spiritual power and were not easy to break free. Seeing that Townsend was about to fall to the ground, Reynolds smiled proudly. There was a soft couch under the field, and the dragon girl's spiritual power was strong. He didn't have to worry about her falling and getting a concussion. Unfortunately, he was happy too early. A few golden dragons suddenly emerged from Townsend's body. They opened their mouths and were bitten off by the slow ropes and then retracted. Reynolds was shocked. Life protection spiritual power? Like the active protection spiritual power, the life protection spiritual power was an extremely rare defensive spiritual power. It was related to the bloodline of each race. Other races' life items may be different, but the dragon's life item must be a dragon. Therefore, Reynolds recognized it at a glance. Townsend spat out a golden balloon from her hands. When it hit the ground, it bounced back like a rubber ball. She flipped her body, gently touched the ball, and rushed back into the field again. If he used solid ice power, Reynolds had some confidence that she wouldn't be able to return to the stage, just like Vaslaki. However, he couldn't expose his ice spiritual power at this moment, so he had to give up. Townsend was too arrogant and had almost been defeated by Reynolds in the first round. He was a little angry and did not hold back. After landing on the ground, he clapped his hands. 8 gray chi wriggled under the dojo and surrounded him. Reynolds was slightly surprised. It was the first time he saw Townsend use a real dragon's spiritual power of a second color. He didn't dare to face it head-on and flew back. However, the gray energy was faster and soon surrounded him in all directions. Reynolds saw this and quickly jumped up high. However, at this time, 8 earth dragons on the ground quickly roared and went behind Reynolds. They used their heads and tails to hit his body towards Townsend like a baseball. His whole body shook, but it wasn't as painful as imagined. Townsend's 8 earth dragons' spiritual power was mainly used to maintain the speed and drive the escapee back. The real killer was the master in front. Seeing that Renault was flying towards him while waving his arms and legs, unable to change his direction in the air, Townsend was pleased with himself. Blackface Ghost, let's see if you'll lose this time. She used her dragon power. Chapter 505. Reynolds, who had been very flustered and seemed to be at a loss, suddenly stopped his meaningless actions when the distance between the two was only 6 or 7 meters. At this time, he was calm and collected, without a trace of panic. He raised his hands, thumbs up, and the other 3 fingers connected with his palms. Townsend was a little confused because she had never seen this kind of strange move before. She had seen the special property of Reynolds's spirit bind shoulder throw just now, so she was a little afraid. She didn't know what it would be this time. However, her family's true dragon chi was invincible and could even contend with dark spiritual power. Townsend believed that people with weaker spiritual power than her would not be able to take advantage of her in a head-on fight. If one observed carefully, they would find that Reynolds' gesture was very similar to pulling the trigger of a gun. And the next moment, he actually laughed slyly and said, "Bang!" Of course, there were no pistols in the king's realm, but with his shout, a thin needle of fire energy came out from the tip of his index finger and pierced towards Townsend more fiercely than a bullet. A flying type of needle spiritual power? This was the first time she heard that the extremely demanding needle spiritual power could actually be used as a flying type skill. Townsend was shocked. This pervert was attacking her vital point, her chest that was gradually developing with great difficulty. If it was pierced, who knew what the consequences would be? Townsend was worried, and she didn't dare to say that her true dragon spiritual power would be able to completely break the needle spiritual power. She could only give up on the target and quickly dodge, so Reynolds avoided a certain defeat. Townsend missed a great opportunity and said with shame, anxiousness, and anger, You pervert." Reynolds thought proudly, but he said, "Miss Townsend, didn't we agree a moment ago? I can use any attack means and moves, and you also agreed." Townsend was speechless. She had fallen into this guy's trap, but she couldn't say anything. Damn profiteer. Damn profiteer. Townsend cursed a dozen times in her heart, and then said in a flustered and exasperated manner, "Okay, I want you to be convinced." As soon as her voice fell, a black three-tailed, three-headed dragon with the same body as a face emerged from her palm with a roar. Its eyes were glaring angrily. With one look, one could tell that this was a ferocious move. It was obvious that she was serious. Townsend's face was covered with frost. Without saying a word, she drove the three-headed dragon to attack Reynolds. She was so proud and arrogant that she had been frustrated twice. She had to take down this hateful profiteer in front of her as soon as possible to relieve the anger in her heart. Otherwise, she would soon have a hormonal imbalance. Reynolds used the same trick again, sending out the needles to neutralize her attack, but this time it did not work. The speed and flexibility of Townsend's three-headed dragon was comparable to that of an earth dragon. With a sweep of its tail, it had already swept away the two spiritual needles, and its power was also as strong as the frightening dragon hits the shore. Reynolds couldn't compare to Townsend in terms of strength, and he couldn't use all sorts of unimaginable ice elemental skills. Furthermore, he also couldn't use Magic Blast and Tornado Kill. Reynolds was also unhappy about this. Otherwise, he might have been able to contend with Townsend. After all, he was once a rising star of Blue Moon. He wasn't much weaker than Townsend, and he might even be stronger. But now, he could only be forced into a corner by this shrewish woman. When Townsend saw that he could not resist, she became even more unforgiving and attacked him like a storm. Finally, she saw that Reynolds had stopped moving, and she hesitated. Once this guy showed an abnormal situation, it was very likely that there was something strange going on. Of course, Townsend could not give up such a good opportunity. She focused all her attention and drove the three-headed dragon to fly towards him. Seeing that her ferocious move was getting closer and closer to Reynolds, Townsend was overjoyed. However, at this moment, Reynolds loudly said, "I admit." Townsend forcibly stopped her attack and walked towards Reynolds. She said with a proud expression, "Admit defeat?" Reynolds had a strange smile on his face. He spread out his hand, and a bag of white powder immediately covered Townsend. The dragon girl was caught off guard and immediately took it all. She closed her eyes and exclaimed, "Dennis, what are you doing?" Reynolds laughed and said, "I didn't admit defeat. I just want to say, I'm serious. Be careful." Townsend was furious. "You cheated." At this time, Reynolds had already slipped away like a thief. Townsend, who was in a rage, was about to use her true dragon spiritual power when she suddenly felt itchy all over, as if she was bitten by insects. The situation was the same as Leon's that day, but the effect was much weaker. Townsend did not know what this was, but she endured the itch and chased after it. Unfortunately, her spiritual power was too chaotic, and her power was greatly reduced. Reynolds easily dodged left and right, and he even provoked her. "Miss Townsend, you should admit defeat. If you admit defeat, I will give you the antidote." Townsend was about to explode with anger. She gritted her teeth and chased after this profiteer without saying a word. However, it did not take long for the itch to spread all over her body. Townsend finally could not bear it and used her hands to scratch her body. Reynolds saw that the victory was in his hands, but he did not take the opportunity to attack. From afar, he said, "Miss Townsend, you should admit defeat. You can suffer less." However, Townsend was stubborn and refused to admit defeat. Under his shameless means, she was unwilling to say the two words "admit defeat." Reynolds couldn't bear it anymore. Just as he was about to give the man some face and let her go, he heard a paw sound. Townsend's Taoist robe and underwear were torn apart by her too much force. Her pair of small white bunnies suddenly popped out. Townsend was stunned, so was Reynolds. Lin Ling and the other girls watching the battle were also stunned. For a moment, the training hall was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. A woman's pride and her private parts appeared in front of a man without any concealment. The dragon girl's private parts were so white and flawless. Below the left one, a heart-shaped cinnabar mole was particularly eye-catching. After at least 5 seconds, Townsend reacted. She pulled up her torn clothes to cover the important parts and said in a trembling voice, What did you see?" Reynolds answered stupidly, "Mole." Then he realized that he was too stupid. He coughed and said, "No, I didn't see anything. I mean, you're a very, very ambitious girl." He seemed to be a little incoherent and did not know how to deal with the situation in front of him. Dragon Lady's last bit of hope was shattered, and she started crying. Reynolds suddenly panicked and hurried to her. He took out a bag of antidote from his arms and handed it to her. "I admit defeat. Miss Townsend, you win." At this point, no matter how shameless he was embarrassed to take advantage of the situation. Townsend took the antidote from his hand. When she let go, the clothes on her chest fell down again. At close range, it was a super close-up. It was more stimulating than human body art. Reynolds's nose was about to bleed. Chapter 506. Townsend was filled with shame and anger. She slapped him while crying, "Black-face ghost, I hate you." Then she quickly ran to the changing room in the training hall. Reynolds covered his burning face and couldn't get angry. He was more ashamed and uneasy. He didn't think that things would get out of hand and it would be hard to clean up. Lin Ling and the other girls looked at each other. After a while, they came over and said, "Dennis, Mr. Dennis, are you all right?" Reynolds said dejectedly, "I'm fine." But his heart was filled with worry. If Townsend ran home to tell on him, then everything would be over. Not to mention a meteoric rise. He wouldn't even have a place to stay in Ackland. The perfect plan that had been drawn up a long time ago, the smooth road and the blueprint that he had imagined, suddenly shattered into pieces like fragile glass. When Reynolds returned home, he didn't see Townsend. Reynolds's heart became even more worried, and he began to consider if he should run away. Thinking about how Dragon King Mike Zelka, who loved his third daughter Townsend, would use the 10 greatest tortures of the Qing dynasty to cut him into 17 or 18 pieces and throw him into the sea to feed the fish, Reynolds's body trembled. However, to give up the foundation that he had worked so hard to build and run away to start all over again, this was easier said than done. After 3 days of fear, Reynolds was absent-minded and had a tasteless meal in the inner court when Townsend suddenly appeared. Her eyes were red like she had been crying for 3 days. Reynolds threw his bowl down and went up to her. He begged with a crying face, "Miss Townsend, great aunt, please be magnanimous and forgive me this time. I deserve to die. I'm despicable and shameless. I'm a slut. I'm not human. But Lin Ling and the others are good friends with you. So please don't let your father know about this. Otherwise, I'm dead. As for how you want to punish me to appease your anger, that's up to you." Reynolds saw that things had taken a turn for the better. He quickly told Lin Ling and the others to beg for mercy. Lin Ling and the other girls were all clever people. Without Reynolds' reminder, they all went to Townsend's side to comfort her and beg for mercy. After the girls finished speaking, Townsend pointed at Reynolds and slowly said, "I want you to marry me right now." These words were like hundreds of thunderbolts striking Reynolds's heart at the same time. He stammered, "Miss Townsend, you really know how to joke, huh?" But he was even more panicked inside. Could it be that her endurance was too weak and she had gone crazy after receiving such a heavy blow? If that was the case, he would be dead for sure. Moreover, he would die without a complete corpse. The women also looked at Townsend in astonishment, finding it hard to believe. Looking at Dragon Lady's serious expression, Reynolds couldn't laugh anymore. He asked, "Miss Townsend, may I know the reason?" Townsend coldly spat out, "Because you saw the mole under my left breast. When I was 6 years old, I swore to the Dragon Sovereign that the first person to see it other than my father would be my husband." Reynolds almost fainted. Just because of this simple reason, he immediately thought of Journey to the West. With a dry cough, Reynolds continued, "But we don't seem to have any feelings for each other." Townsend still said, "You saw the mole under my left breast." Reynolds said, "I'm a despicable and shameless profiteer. I can't afford to compensate you, Miss Townsend. Townsend said, You saw the mole under my left breast. Reynolds, after a series of questions and answers, Reynolds was sure of one thing. Townsend was very shrewish on the surface, but she was one of the most conservative women in the king's realm. Just like the women in ancient times on Earth, as long as they were seen with their bodies, they would not marry anyone other than a soldier, whether they liked it or not. Therefore, such an incredible change occurred. Although her temper was a bit bad, Reynolds had to admit that Townsend was a very attractive woman. Her appearance, figure, and straightforward personality were all to Reynolds' liking. There was no doubt about this. However, Reynolds didn't dare to accept this generous gift. Even if Townsend was willing, Mike Searle wouldn't be willing. As the master of the Dragon Clan, how could he let his daughter marry a dirty businessman who started his business by selling inferior drugs? He would only kill him to protect his daughter's innocence. Townsend's expression was cold. I'll give you two choices. The first is to marry me, and the second is to let my father castrate you. I can guarantee that Lin Ling and the others will be fine. Reynolds shuddered and said in a trembling voice, Miss Townsend, let's talk things over. Don't be impulsive. Townsend said with unusual dissatisfaction, Am I ugly? Reynolds hurriedly waved his hand. No, Miss Townsend is a natural beauty. You're the most attractive woman I've ever seen. Although Reynolds thought Lin Ling was more beautiful, he didn't care so much now that he had to flatter her. Townsend said, My figure is not good? Reynolds flattered again. Miss Townsend's figure is like a devil's, charming and irresistible. When I see it, I want to... Reynolds found that he had gone a bit too far and had a tendency to develop into lewdness. This was not the right situation, so he quickly stopped talking. Townsend said, You want to F***CK me, right? Yes, no. Reynolds' tongue was like a lotus flower, and he didn't know how to answer properly. If he didn't know, he would definitely mistake Townsend for a shameless girl based on her words. Reynolds was no exception. He thought to himself, when did this evil woman become so open-minded? Just because he saw that mole, she really thought of herself as a member of the Chen family? Townsend continued to ask unyieldingly, My family is too poor to be worthy of you? Reynolds thought that if the dragon race was poor, there would be no rich people in the king's realm. He said with a sad face, Let's put it this way, Miss Townsend. It's because your family and yourself are too outstanding that I don't dare to have the thought of marrying you. Otherwise, your father would definitely kill me. Townsend snorted and said, I don't care. In short, you have to think of a way for me. Otherwise, let him kill you. At worst, I'll be a widow. Damn it, Reynolds cursed in his heart. It was said that after mating, female spiders would bite and eat the male spiders. This dragon girl was almost as vicious as the female spiders. Seeing Townsend's determined look, Lin Ling and the other girls were helpless. They could only stare at Reynolds and see how he would solve it. Wiping his sweat, Reynolds' mind turned quickly, and he quickly thought of a feasible solution. Then he said, Miss Townsend, how about this? I will secretly get engaged with you first. Then, when I have a successful career and stand out in Aquiline, it won't be too late to marry you. At that time, you won't lose face, and your father will be able to accept it. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? Oh, right, before this, Miss Townsend must not tell your father. Otherwise, you will really be a widow. The central strategy of his words was one word: delay. Chapter 507. Townsend thought for a while and said, Okay, I'll wait. But if you want to break the engagement, I'll hunt you down and kill you even if you have to run to the ends of the earth. Reynolds smiled. How can that be? Miss Townsend is so beautiful. This is Dennis' fortune. Looking at her temper, Reynolds didn't mind. Now that she was his fiancée, she was like a wild horse with a rein. How long could he pull it? With a little bit of training, wouldn't she be more docile than a Persian cat? Getting this girl, who was extremely important to his future, was simply a gift from the heavens. It came too easily, almost like an illusion. Reynolds bit his tongue hard. The sharp pain reminded him that he was not in a dream. At first, he thought that an unintentional mistake would turn into an unexpected disaster. But in the end, it was a dramatic happy ending. Reynolds could not help but think of an old saying from Earth. Misfortune may be a blessing in disguise. In Reynolds' dictionary, there was no such thing as lewd, only more lewd. Thus, even after Townsend became his fiancée, he still slept with Lin Ling and the other women. Generally speaking, in the king's realm, other than the wife, the concubines could not sleep with their husbands every night. They could only wait in the side room. But Reynolds did not care about this rule. He could do whatever he wanted. This was the rule. The Dragon Lady also let him do whatever he wanted. She did not object at all. Reynolds admired this very much. He thought that it would take some time to train this shrewish woman to be obedient. He did not expect things to be so simple. Reynolds asked Lin Ling to set up more scouting puppets in the inner court. He also personally set up some traps. In short, Michael Searle must not know about Townsend. The last time he was forced to investigate, it was because he said that he wanted to observe the effect of Townsend's breasts in the outer court. That was why there was a problem. Now, in the inner court of the Heavenly Network, Reynolds believed that even if Michael Searle came personally, he would not be able to enter the most secure central area without being discovered. The Dragon King had always been shrewd, but he had made a mistake this time. According to his usual behavior, Reynolds was just a timid little merchant who was careful to maintain his newly established business and would never dare to do anything to his daughter. But he was wrong, and very wrong. Renaud had always been a bold person. He dared to kill Leon in front of guys. How arrogant he was could be imagined. Mike Searle's miscalculation had led to his third daughter falling into the wolf's mouth. To be more precise, Townsend was the one who initiated the marriage, and Reynolds was the one who was forced into it. It was just that he accepted it willingly and joyfully. Because Townsend's devotion was based on a certain deep-rooted concept, without emotional support, marriage would not be stable. It was like a double-edged blade, and a slight carelessness could hurt oneself. In order to win her favor, Reynolds tried his best to make her happy, such as watching the stars and the moon, giving her flowers, accompanying her shopping, or personally cooking for her. It was really difficult for Reynolds. He was a rookie when it came to picking up girls. He used all the pitifully few methods to pick up girls. But the most useful method was to recite poems. He took a few ancient poems from Earth that praised love and recited them to her under the moonlight, and it had a miraculous effect. When Townsend saw the cinnabar mole, she had already accepted her fate. In her preconceived subconscious, she only wanted to make up for her regrets with the good qualities of her future husband. Then, she was pleasantly surprised to find that Reynolds was not just a profiteer who knew how to sell dirty things. He had many good qualities. For example, he was humorous, meticulous, considerate, and romantic. Most importantly, he was a very literary person, just like her father whom she worshipped. Thus, she slowly fell for him. Let me tell you, black-faced ghost, no matter how many women you find, I will make them big. Otherwise, I will teach you a lesson, Humph. Townsend pinched Reynolds's nose to threaten him. As the Dragon King had hundreds of wives and concubines, Townsend, who was deeply affected, had long been numbed by the concept of men being romantic. The only thing she could fight for was a position among Reynolds's women. But then again, she was very surprised that Reynolds only had one or even two women. For his wealth today, even 10 women were not enough. Holding Townsend on his left and Lin Ling on his right, Reynolds felt like he was dreaming. With the Dragon Girl, many troublesome things were suddenly solved. Especially in politics, things that could not be solved by ordinary friends could be solved indirectly with her help. Reynolds was in a good mood. He stared at Townsend's chest and said, "Tisk, TSK, you want to make it big with such little capital?" Townsend became angry out of humiliation. She pinched him hard on the shoulder and said, "What are you saying? Are you mocking me?" Lin Ling watched the two of them flirt from the side and laughed. She didn't know why, but she didn't feel jealous at all. She knew very well how important Townsend was to Reynolds. Of course, in Reynolds's heart, Lin Ling's position would never be shaken. If Townsend was jealous and behaved atrociously towards Lin Ling, he would not hesitate to divorce her and offend the Dragon King. Helena and the other women were already asleep. The business had continued to increase, and they were too tired. Townsend said unhappily, "Linger, don't laugh. Help me teach him a lesson. And Debbie, Molly, and Helena, come too." Townsend was not stupid. He had seen many fights in the dragon race. He knew how important Lin Ling was to Reynolds, and also Reynolds's temper. He did not dare to treat her badly. She was like a sister to him. If he could get a capable helper to fight for Reynolds's favor, it would be very useful for his plan to make it big in the future. Lin Ling giggled. Of course, she would not listen to Townsend to deal with Reynolds. As for Lorna and the other women, they did not dare to offend him. Reynolds smiled and said, "I'm sorry, but you're no longer Miss. You are my woman." Townsend was not convinced. "So what if I am your woman? Don't even think about it if you want to manipulate me like a puppet. Just give up." Townsend was indeed not like Lin Ling, who was obedient to Reynolds. She was a woman with a certain degree of independence. However, when it came to important matters, she would never dare to go against him. She would even do her best to help him. This was caused by the deep-rooted mentality of follow the husband's orders that she had cultivated since she was young. Reynolds looked at Townsend and felt that she was very interesting. A woman like her should be spoiled. At first, he was just being used by her, but now, Reynolds was slowly starting to like her. Reynolds patted the dragon girl's shoulder and said, Okay, Mississippi, whatever you say, huh?" Townsend pursed his lips and said, "I brought you some good news to cheer you up." Chapter 508. Reynolds' mind shook. "What good news?" Townsend snorted. "I won't say it. You're making me angry." Reynolds could faintly guess what it was, but he had to confirm it with his own ears. "Good, madam. Don't keep me in suspense. Just say it." The word madam worked well on Townsend. It was also Reynolds' well-tested trump card. The dragoness immediately softened. "Forget it. I'll tell you. I've already asked my father to help you with the sea hunt." As expected, Reynolds was overjoyed as he kissed her on the lips. "Huh. Good. Very good." Townsend's beautiful face blushed for the first time as she complained, "You're taking advantage of me again." Although she said this, her heart was filled with joy. Reynolds looked at her delicate and beautiful face, and his lust was aroused. However, he did not dare to act rashly. If he saw Townsend's cinnabar mole, the Dragon King would definitely see it, and it would be troublesome. Therefore, Reynolds could only act quickly. Townsend said, "Dennis, you have to work hard at the sea hunt. If you can get a good result, our marriage will be much smoother." Reynolds said, "Relax, I definitely won't disappoint you." That's right. I heard that the sea hunt is also a son-in-law selection event, right?" The sea hunt was a place to show off, and it would attract a large number of Aquilan girls to watch. A brave warrior would easily gain the favor of a beautiful woman, creating a happy ending. Over time, many large and small families or families with a bit of fame would bring their daughters to join the crowd, looking for a good son-in-law. This had already become an ancient tradition of Aquilan. Townsend nodded. "That's right." Reynolds grabbed his chin. "I heard that the Ori families of Vina will also appear at the sea hunt. I don't know if that's true or not. I heard that Avina is an ice beauty that won't melt even after 10,000 years. I never thought that she would be there. Hey. Seeing his lecherous look, Townsend said angrily, "Do you want her to take a fancy to you?" Reynolds saw Townsend become jealous and was a bit surprised. She had already said that she didn't care if he took a concubine, so why was she so agitated now? He asked in surprise, "What's wrong with you? Do you have a grudge with this Avina?" Townsend snorted and said, "I don't care about anyone else, but not her." The Ori family was a large family, second only to the Dragon clan in Aquilan. As one of the most famous people of the younger generation, Avina was famous whether it was in terms of beauty or martial arts. She could compete with Townsend and was seen as the strongest competitor by the Dragon Girl. Adding in the fact that the two of them had different views since they were young, they didn't get along. Townsend thought that Avina was pretending to be virtuous and hypocritical, but Avina retorted that Townsend was too wild and unladylike. Women were narrow-minded, so they had a grudge against each other. Of course, they wouldn't fight or even duel like men. They just didn't like each other. Reynolds still didn't quite understand the grudge between the two. Anti-advertisement. Why? Townsend frowned and said, "Don't ask so many questions. In short, I won't share a husband with that woman. Do you want her or me? You tell me." Reynolds thought to himself that women were really unreasonable when they got jealous. He had just casually mentioned the name of Ina, and they hadn't even met, but Townsend was already so nervous that it was as if someone was trying to steal his husband away from him. He laughed and said, "Of course I want my wife. What does a vine count for? She's just a pile of shit in my eyes." Townsend's heart filled with joy when he heard this. She took the initiative to give him a kiss, which was rare. It could be seen just how happy she was. Reynolds' interest was piqued. What kind of woman was Evina? She was just too low-key. She was as famous as Townsend, but she had never appeared on the news before. At least he had never seen her before. The day of the sea hunt was approaching, so he should know then. Although Townsend was very disgusted with her, Reynolds did not give up on seeing her face, because Evina's nickname made him think of another woman, a woman who was also known as an ice beauty. During this period of time in Renault, he was very carefree and proud of his success. First of all, the business negotiations in the various countries of the continent went smoothly. Chain stores sprung up like bamboo shoots after a rain, quickly growing. Not long after, at least a third of the countries in the king's realm had the plaque Rejuvenation Hall. The huge profits were like a flood that couldn't be stopped. It rolled in, and the growth was extremely fierce. In Aquilan, he continued to develop a good relationship with other high-level people. Although he never appeared on the news, there weren't many people who didn't know the name Dennis. There was also the upcoming sea hunt, which might push his popularity and status to a higher level. Chunlin's luck could be said to have bounced back. From being chased like a stray dog, he was now a famous person in Aquilan. Although he couldn't call the wind and summon the rain, no one dared to look down on him. After taking Yi into his pocket, Chunlin's life was even smoother. He was almost never hindered in his work. He even began to wonder if Yi was his lucky star, a legendary woman who could bring good fortune to her husband and children. In addition to being busy with business, Chunlin was also vigorously training talents. The first batch of people was his large group of servants, because they were the most pitiful people, but also the ones with the most clean backgrounds. These women all had low self-esteem and were numb. It was very difficult for them to become capable people with self-awareness, but this didn't make Chunlin shrink back. The pervert used the methods of training female spies on Earth, personally instilling a large amount of new ideas into them every day. First, they had to be absolutely loyal to their master. Then they had to be led through actual combat to develop their self-confidence. If they were competent, they could obtain money, status, respect, and more freedom than a servant. This was undoubtedly a very tempting opportunity. A lowly servant suddenly seeing the light of hope that could change her fate. There was no need to mention how attractive it was. With both ideas and material, this group of women were very focused on learning. They could be considered trusted people, but Chunlin didn't know if they would succeed. Their innate conditions were too bad, so he was afraid that their thoughts would be imprisoned. They would be so obedient that they would rather be a slave than struggle. Because of this, they were still in the experimental stage. If they succeeded, Chunlin would have them replace him and use the same method to train the next batch of people. Then the next batch would do the same thing. Of course, this process was very long, especially in the beginning. The help that a few people could bring was very limited. Everything was going according to plan, developing in the direction he imagined. The only regret was that Chunlin's martial arts were progressing very slowly. It couldn't compare to the others. Perhaps it was because of the limitations of the world. Although his cultivation technique was unmatched on the continent, and he had a high starting point, which was already leaps and bounds compared to others, Chunlin was still not satisfied. Then again, the sea hunt was already in the countdown. Chapter 509. In the blink of an eye, there were only 5 days left until the sea hunt. All of Aquilan's households were decorated with decorations, and shops selling mascots on the streets suddenly increased. Every household was in a festive mood. Chunlin's residence in the first-class city of Gatuchuo was even more lively. She was dressed up beautifully by the servants, as if she was a substitute bride. However, it wasn't just to send Chunlin off to the sea hunting grounds tomorrow. More importantly, today was Lin Ling's birthday. After today, she would be 20 years old. Lin Ling, who was dressed up, was beautiful and cute. Other than her black hair, she was wearing a purple dress. Her figure was curvy, and she looked like a violet flower that had just bloomed. She shyly showed her extraordinary beauty to the world. Even the other girls were amazed by her beauty, not to mention Chunlin. Chunlin didn't spread the news of Lin Ling's birthday. He just celebrated it on his own. However, he had many female servants, and all of them were very lively and indulgent under the love of Chunlin, a master who didn't have a strict sense of hierarchy. 2 women made a play, and 3 women made a street. Chunlin had received at least 20 women as gifts, including Helena and Yi. It was like a market. It was lively enough. Everyone gave Lin Ling their blessings and gifts. Among them, Yi's most valuable gift was a water avoidance bead. After wearing it, one's ability to move in the water would be doubled, and they could breathe through their pores. To the residents of the Sea Kingdom, it was easy to imagine how important it was. The water avoidance bead was formed after the death of a 1,000-year-old water-type monster, the ice avoidance bead. There weren't many magic beasts that died naturally, and there were even fewer that could be formed, showing how precious it was. Yi was a member of the dragon race and was naturally good at swimming. She could also breathe in the water, so the water avoidance bead wasn't very useful to her. However, to give away such a precious treasure was already very generous. This was because she knew that by building a good relationship with Lin Ling, she was indirectly grabbing onto Chunlin's heart. The Dragon Girl's plan was very well thought out. Of course, the crafty old fox Chunlin wouldn't not understand her crafty thoughts. But as the saying goes, if the family is harmonious, everything will prosper. Since Yi was so smart, he didn't need to be taught to understand this truth, which was even better. All the servants and attendants of the Chunlin estate were gathered together in the elegant garden in the inner courtyard. In the center of the garden was a large round stone table with 6 layers of cake placed on it. The rich and mellow smell of butter mixed with the fragrance of flowers in the garden, making it even more attractive. Green leaves of agate fruits decorated the cake even more exquisitely. 11 small candles of different colors were emitting a beautiful light. This cake was completely made according to the method on Earth, and it was the first one in the king's realm. The number of candles represented Lin Ling's age. This ceremony was very special and novel for everyone. Even the experienced and knowledgeable Yi hadn't seen it before. She pinched Chunlin's arm and said, "When it's my birthday, you must also make a cake like this for me." The more she came into contact with him, the more she found that Chunlin had a lot of new tricks up his sleeves. For a dragon girl who likes strange things and can spend a lot of money for useless things, the temptation is naturally very strong. Unknowingly, Yi has been deeply attracted to Chunlin from the time when she was willing to follow him. Chunlin was pinched by her and felt pain. He nodded again and again. "Okay, as long as young miss says." Yi was satisfied and let go of his hand. Chunlin looked at the place where he was pinched just now and saw a red patch. Those shortcomings of the dragon girl, many times in Chunlin's eyes, were very cute. Unfortunately, she liked to pinch people for no reason, and she didn't hold back. Looking at the party Chunlin had carefully prepared for her, Lin Ling's excited little face turned red under the candlelight. Chunlin smiled and said, "Come, Linger. Close your eyes and make a wish. If you can blow out all the candles in one breath, your wish will come true." Lin Ling happily said, "Dennis, really?" Although she still called Chunlin like this, Yi already knew that they weren't blood-related siblings. Chunlin nodded, "Really?" Profiteering was like a flood that couldn't be stopped. It rolled in, and the momentum of growth was extremely fierce. In Acolin, he continued to develop a good relationship with other high-level people. Although he never appeared on TV, there weren't many people who didn't know the name Dennis. There was also the upcoming sea hunt, which might push his popularity and status to a higher level. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Chun-Lin's luck had bounced back strongly. From being chased like a stray dog to becoming a famous person in Acolin. Although they didn't dare say that he could summon the wind and rain, no one dared to look down on him. After taking Yi into his pocket, Chun-Lin's life was even smoother. He was almost never stopped doing things. He even began to wonder if Yi was his lucky star, the legendary top-quality woman who could bring good fortune to her husband and children. Other than being busy with business, Chun-Lin also vigorously cultivated talents, and the first batch of people was his large group of servants. Because they were the most pitiful people, they also had the most clean background. These women were all very inferior and numb. It was very difficult for them to become decisive and capable people with self-awareness, but this didn't make Chun-Lin shrink back. The pervert used the methods of training female spies on Earth, personally instilling a large amount of new ideas into them every day. First, they had to be absolutely loyal to their master. Then they had to be led through actual combat to develop self-confidence. If they were competent, they could obtain money, status, respect, and more freedom than the servants. This was without a doubt a very tempting opportunity. For a lowly servant to suddenly see a ray of hope that could change her fate, there was no need to mention how attractive it was. With both thoughts and material, this group of women was also very focused on learning. They could be considered as trusted subordinates, but Chun-Lin didn't know if they would succeed. Their innate conditions were a bit too bad. What he was most afraid of was that their thoughts had already been imprisoned. They were so obedient that they would rather become slaves than struggle. Because of this, they were still in the experimental stage. If they succeeded, Chun-Lin would have them replace him and use the same method to train the next batch of people, and then the next batch would do the same thing. Of course, this process was very long, especially in the beginning. The help that these few people could bring was very limited. Everything was going according to plan, developing in the direction he imagined. The only regret was that Chun-Lin's own martial skills were progressing very slowly. It couldn't compare to others. Perhaps it was because he was limited by worldly affairs. Although his cultivation technique was unparalleled on the continent, and he had a high starting point, already advancing by leaps and bounds compared to others, Chun-Lin was still not satisfied. Not to mention, the sea hunt was already in the countdown. In the blink of an eye, there were only 5 days left until the sea hunt. All of Acolin's household were decorated with decorations, and there were many stores selling mascots on the streets. Every household was in a festive mood. Chapter 510. Reynolds' mansion in the first-tier city of Katyuta was even livelier. The servants dressed her up to the nines, making her look like a surrogate bride. However, it wasn't just for the sake of sending Reynolds off to the sea hunt tomorrow. More importantly, it was Elaine's birthday. After today, she would be 20 years old. Elaine was beautiful and adorable under her splendid attire. Aside from her black hair, she wore a purple muslin dress that accentuated her curves. She looked like a violet that had just bloomed, bashfully showing off her extraordinary beauty to the world. Even the other girls were amazed by her beauty, let alone Reynolds. Reynolds didn't spread the news of Irene's birthday and just celebrated it on his own. However, he had many female servants, and all of them were very lively and indulgent under the doting of Reynolds, who didn't have a strict concept of hierarchy. 2 women were a play, and 3 women were a street. Reynolds had received at least 20 women, and including Helena and Avina, it was like a lively market. It was lively enough. Everyone gave Elaine their blessings and gifts. Among them, Avina's most valuable gift was a water-repellent pearl. After wearing it, one's ability to move in water would be doubled. One could also breathe through one's pores. One could imagine how important it was to the people of the Sea Kingdom. The water-repellent pearl was formed after the death of a 1,000-year-old water beast, the ice-repellent pearl. There were very few demons that died of natural causes, and even fewer that could be turned into pearls. Avina was a member of the dragon race. She was naturally good at swimming and could breathe underwater. The water-repellent pearl wasn't very useful to her, but it was generous of her to give away such a valuable treasure. She knew that by building a good relationship with Elaine, she would indirectly win Reynolds' heart. The dragon girl's wishful thinking was very good. Of course, the sly Reynolds wouldn't fail to understand what she was thinking. But as the saying goes, if the family is harmonious, everything will prosper. Since Avina was so smart, she didn't need to be taught to understand this principle, which was even better. In the elegant garden of the inner courtyard, all the servants and attendants of Renault's mansion were gathered together. In the center of the garden, there was a large 6-layer cake on a round stone table. The rich aroma of butter, mixed with the fragrance of the flowers in the garden, made the cake even more attractive. Green agate fruits decorated the cake, and 11 small candles of different colors were emitting a beautiful light. The cake was made completely according to Earth's method. It was the first of its kind in the world of kings. The number of candles represented Elaine's age. This ceremony was very unique to everyone. Even the knowledgeable Avina had never seen something like this before. She pinched Reynolds' arm and said, "When it's my birthday, you have to make me a cake like this too." The more she interacted with Reynolds, the more she realized that he had a lot of new tricks up his sleeves. For a dragon girl who liked strange things and was willing to spend a lot of money on useless things, the temptation was very strong. Unknowingly, Avina had gone from being willing to follow fate to being deeply attracted to Reynolds. Reynolds was in pain from her pinch, but he nodded and said, "Okay, I'll do as you say." Avina was satisfied and let go of him. Reynolds looked at the place where she pinched him and saw a red patch. The dragon girl's shortcomings were often cute in Reynolds' eyes, but it was a pity that she liked to pinch people for no reason, and she didn't hold back either. Looking at the party Reynolds had prepared for her, Elaine's excited face flushed red under the candlelight. Reynolds smiled and said, "Close your eyes and make a wish. If you can blow out all the candles in one breath, your wish will come true." Elaine said happily, "Dennis, really?" Although she still called Reynolds that way, Avina already knew that they were not blood-related siblings. Reynolds nodded and said, "Really?" Elaine closed her eyes and clasped her hands together with a smile. After more than 10 seconds, she opened her eyes again. Then, she puffed out her cheeks and blew out all the candles on the cake. Everyone cheered loudly. Although there weren't many people, the atmosphere was lively. Reynolds hugged her slender waist and said, "What did you wish for, Ling?" Elaine glanced at Reynolds and said, "Humph, I'm not telling you." Avina interrupted, "Dennis, you miser, I don't think you've given Elaine a gift yet, right?" Elaine was satisfied and helped Reynolds out of the situation. "Dennis prepared this special cake for me. Isn't that the best gift?" Reynolds nodded seriously and said, "Don't worry, I've already prepared it." He took out a small crescent necklace from his pocket. The material was strange, orange, and translucent. Its smooth surface gave off an ancient feeling, but it was neither bright nor shiny. Avina snorted and said, "What kind of gift is this? It's so shabby." Reynolds smiled and said, "This thing isn't very useful, but I've been wearing it since I was born. It's called amber, also known as the beast soul. It was produced in ancient times and symbolizes purity and eternity. It's said that it can ward off evil and protect one's body. I'm not bragging, but you won't be able to find a second one in the entire continent." On Earth, amber was a fossil from a prehistoric pine tree. It had been formed for 40 to 60,000 years. It was a question whether the king's realm had such a long history. This was the only thing Reynolds' mother had left him. However, on this day, he gave Elaine his love, which showed how much he loved her. Avina had also seen the amber necklace around Reynolds' neck. She thought it was an ordinary ornament, but now she knew that it was something he had been wearing since he was born. It was very likely to be a family heirloom. Just this meaning alone was no small matter. It was more precious than any valuable or useful treasure, not to mention that there wouldn't be a second one in the entire continent. Avina, who had originally despised it, suddenly felt a little jealous. Elaine naturally knew the meaning of this unremarkable necklace. She was so excited that she didn't know what to say. Reynolds unbuckled the necklace and put on the girl's swan-like white jade neck. "Happy birthday, Elaine." He didn't know if it was an illusion, but when the amber came into contact with Elaine's body, it suddenly flashed like a light bulb. However, it was almost undetectable. Just when Reynolds thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, Elaine's kiss fell on his lips. The touched girl had let go of her reservations and boldly expressed her love in front of other girls. Adulthood meant a lot of things. It seemed that he could do more things that he couldn't do before. Reynolds was drunk. This time, he was really drunk. He had drunk at least 2 jars of the 100 Men Fall that Avina had stolen from the Dragon King's treasury. Even Iron Man would fall down. He was so happy that he couldn't control himself. He had witnessed Elaine grow from a weak little girl with no fighting ability to survive to the powerful and confident spirit envoys she was today. He was very gratified. At the same time, he was also glad that he didn't use the fleeting time given by Randolph in the wrong place. Chapter 511. The bright red morning sun slowly rose from the sea, sprinkling the first rays of the morning on the water. The entire ocean sparkled with golden waves, beautiful and full of vitality. Diligent seagulls were soaring in the sky, struggling to find the food they needed for the new day. They were so elegant in the sea breeze. Small swordfish with colorful wings leaped out of the water for more than 10 meters before diving straight back into the sea. A group of young sea lions were chasing and playing on the waves. Countless amphibious bantams were swaying their fat butts as they climbed ashore to breathe the freshest air or lay flat on the beach, exposing their big round bellies to bask in the sun. They were so relaxed and contented. This was the Kuan Sha Island of the Dara Inland Sea. It was also a small level 4 city in the Ackland Kingdom. Everything was full of vitality, and everything was full of vitality. However, a loud and distant sound of war drums broke the peaceful scene in front of them. All kinds of small animals were frightened and nervous. Even the bold sea lions quickly dived back into the safe embrace of the sea. The bantams were even more panicked as they clumsily ran towards the ocean. Only the seagulls were still flying freely without fear, but they all opened their eyes wide, waiting for the arrival of the uninvited guests. The sound of war drums came closer and closer, followed by a high and continuous sound of horns. Not long after, hundreds of small islands came into sight. To be more precise, it was a huge creature that looked like a floating island, a sea worm. As the largest means of transportation in the king's realm, it was shocking to see hundreds of them. At the front of each sea glutton, several hundred half-naked crabmen were furiously beating the large drums made from the skin of the billowing rhinoceros while sweating profusely. Below the stage were 2 rows of smaller platforms, each occupied by squidmen. Holding the half-meter-long horn in his hand, he puffed up his cheeks and blew it with all his might. Such a grand sea show could only be the Ackland Sea Hunt. No one could think of anything else that could be said to be pleasing. The vast ocean seemed to be conquered. What a magnificent scene it was. The warriors on the sea worm all felt their blood boil. Renault's heart was stirred. He saw a heroic spirit, a brave and heroic spirit. No wonder the Ackland people were so passionate about the sea hunt. It was indeed a hot-blooded activity, as exciting as the Olympic Games. Erin's face was also flushed red as she snuggled up to Reynolds. She had just experienced the happiest moment 3 days ago. After completing the transformation from a young girl to a woman, the girl was even more beautiful and moving after the rain and dew. In addition to her skin being whiter and more tender, there was also a layer of faint white fluorescence on the surface of her body. With a ding sound, like glass being hit by a hard rock, a crack appeared in the space, and then the crack quickly spread to other twisted places. The sea demon's body was torn apart along with the space that was torn apart, and it immediately died. When it fell back into the sea, it had turned into white, demonic energy and was absorbed by Reynolds. If other people were present, they would definitely be inexplicably surprised. They had only heard of space magic, but had never heard of space spiritual power. Generally, space magic only had auxiliary functions such as teleporting and carrying items. It was simply unheard of to use it to attack directly. However, there was no one else in this area. Only Irene, Lanarissa, and the others were arranging the camp and setting up the tent. With the sea demon's speed, it would take about 3 days to reach Atlantis, which was not a short journey. On the night of Irene's birthday, the two of them lost control of their spiritual power, and finally, both of them fainted under the impact. However, when Reynolds woke up, he found that his spiritual power had soared to a new level, and a new kind of spiritual power had been produced. The same thing happened to Irene, but it was slightly different. Reynolds had also been intimate with many women, but it was the first time that something strange had happened. In the end, he thought of the 2 strange pills. After he and Irene took them, their bodies had some mysterious changes. That night, it was very likely that the 2 forces of the same origin had mutated through the 2 of them. Just as Reynolds expected, the demonic energy pill had the self-awareness of demonic energy and the docility of spiritual power. Usually, it was no different from spiritual power under the control of one's mind. However, under special circumstances, it would be activated, just like that night when it was attracted by Irene's forces of the same origin. It would be activated. The other activation situation was that when its life was threatened, it would automatically resist external forces. This was the source of Reynolds's active protective spiritual power. Chapter 512. For the time being, Reynolds was still unable to understand all of the effects of this spatial spiritual power. The spatial shattering, just now, was only the most proficient skill that he had mastered in a short period of time. He felt that his understanding of this spiritual power was still at a very superficial stage. It was like a partially open treasure house with many benefits waiting to be excavated. With power in his hands and a beauty in his arms, Reynolds's mood at the moment could only be described with one word: high-spirited. "Let's go back, Ling." Irene nodded meekly and leaned in his arms as they slowly walked back to the camp to savor the moment when the 2 of them were together. Before returning to the camp near the head of the sea glutton, Reynolds heard the exclamations of the crowd. At least 1,000 people were leaning against the railing to watch. Reynolds curiously followed their gazes and saw a green figure in the distance walking on the waves, like a goddess flying towards the sea glutton. When the green figure came closer, the crowd was surprised to find that it was the 3rd princess of the dragon race, Avina. They had long heard that the dragon race's water movement technique, waterless, was unparalleled in the world. It really lived up to its reputation. There were many strong people who could float on water, but it was rare to see someone as relaxed and elegant as her. It was as if she was taking a leisurely stroll, effortlessly. The sea lion came from a long distance, and there were very few people who could rely on the lightness technique in one breath to reach this level. Seeing the dragoness like a fairy flying over with the wind and making a big show of herself, Black Oil and the crowd exclaimed in admiration. Reynolds was proud, and a sense of accomplishment arose spontaneously. This kind of woman was actually in his hands. If he wanted her to go east, she wouldn't dare to go west. If he wanted her to go north, she wouldn't dare to go east. If he wanted her to go east, she wouldn't dare to go west. If he wanted her to go north, she wouldn't dare to go north. And he only relied on a packet of itching powder to do it. When Avina was only 30 meters away from the sea glutton, the water in front of her suddenly broke open, and a purple man-eating sea glutton suddenly drilled out. Its 4 limbs were wide open, and like a piece of cloth, it pounced towards Avina. A faint cold light could be seen flashing faintly. This was the man-eating sea glutton's unique hunting method. As long as one was caught by it, one would be pierced full of holes by the countless sharp teeth inside, and then be torn into pieces. It was very cruel. Everyone exclaimed. Man-eating centipedes could only be regarded as ferocious sea beasts at best. They were still far from the level of vicious beasts. However, the purple centipede had a lifespan of at least 150 years and could not be underestimated. Avina came here after a long journey, and her spiritual power was exhausted. Even Aaron covered her mouth. On the other hand, Reynolds's expression was calm, as if he didn't see his fiancée in danger. Almost at the same time, more than a dozen figures flew out from the sea. All of them were men, and most of them were between 12 and 16 years old. Warrior, archer, assassin. Judging from their armor and weapons, as well as their courage to rush 50 meters away to save someone, they must be the young heroes of Ackland. Reynolds's sea glutton was exceptionally huge and was one of the best of its kind. A large number of experts gathered on it, those with average strength or fame, and those who weren't family members of experts couldn't occupy a spot, let alone ordinary people. After the dozen people in front reacted the fastest, there were quite a few young men that flew out. They all shouted with a sound wave expansion technique, "Miss Avina, please don't panic. I'll be there immediately." They all wanted to show off in front of the crowd, and if they were lucky, they might even be able to win the heart of the beauty. They rushed forward one after another, like an arrow leaving a bow. It didn't seem like they were trying to save someone, but rather like beasts trying to steal their mate. Although Avina's fiery temper was well known, she was also famous for her beauty. She was also the Dragon King's favorite daughter, so if he could become the Dragon King's son-in-law, his future would be limitless. Moreover, the feeling of conquering the young miss of a rich family was also very good. The fastest was an elf clan male thief. This position was known for its speed, so this person was very famous. One of the Ackland 10 heroes, the Wind Shadow Thief Alex. His family's secret wind shadow technique was only a bit weaker than the Dragon Clan's traceless wave treading, so he was very popular among the newcomers. The elves were handsome, and Alex purposely showed off his elegant figure. His beautiful golden hair fluttered in the wind, looking very cool. Everyone on the sea boat cheered for him, as well as the screams of quite a few young girls. The beasts behind him all secretly felt that it was a pity, letting this brat take the lead. Alex was very proud in his heart. He took out a polished dagger and stabbed it at the man eating cheese. He said in a very elegant voice, "Miss Avina, don't worry." Avina had just dodged the man eating cheese first wave of attacks. With a snort, her hand trembled and a long bone whip appeared in her hand, which she suddenly threw out. "Mind your own business." Alex, who was fantasizing about whether the beauty would repay him with her body, was shocked to find that Avina's bone whip was swinging towards him. The man-eating fiends in front of him also turned around and attacked him together. As a result, the pitiful thief was caught off guard and could only hastily dodge the combined attack of the man and beast. Part of the forceful spiritual energy left its trajectory and was greatly disrupted. He could no longer maintain his elegant figure and fell into the water with a splash. The other beasts behind him were scared by Avina's disregard for friend and foe, so they quickly slowed down. They looked at each other in blank dismay, considering whether or not they should help. They didn't need to hesitate any longer. Avina's purple light turned green, and the spiritual energy that couldn't be used suddenly increased. The dragon girl stood on the water surface as light as a feather, without a trace of panic. Her hand whipped down, and the man eating armadillo gave a pitiful cry as it was split in half, turning into demonic energy. At this moment, Alex adjusted his spiritual power and leaped out of the water. As a native of the sea country, his life was not in danger in the water. However, he had lost a lot of face. He had originally gone out to save people, but under the gaze of thousands of people, he had crawled back like a drowned rat. He was simply ashamed. The other beasts who had the same idea of picking up girls as him had personally experienced Avina's strange temperament and were secretly glad that they were not the first to bear the brunt. Avina ignored everyone's gaze and approached the sea glutton with a few jumps. At this time, another dog-toothed shark jumped out recklessly, wanting to challenge the dragon girl's power. Avina didn't care and raised her bone whip again. Even if there were 100 of such monsters, they still wouldn't be her opponent. Just at this moment, two beautiful blue flame flowers flew out, turned from both sides, and landed right in the eyes of the dog-toothed shark. However, there was a chi sound. Amidst the sound of ice and fire colliding, the dog-toothed shark fiercely flapped its tail in pain, creating a large splash, and then sank into the water. The eyes were a vital part, so this dog-toothed shark would never be able to recover. In the future, it could only wander in the sea like a headless fly until it died. The helper's method was very clever, but people thought that he was very stupid. It was obvious that Avina didn't like to be helped by others. There was a precedent just now, and in the next moment, there was another person who wanted to hurt her. It seemed that this guy was tired of living. AI Wena's brows were tightly furrowed, and her pretty face was covered in frost. Her bone whip trembled until it was perfectly straight, but when she followed the trail of the flame flower to find the person who had come to her aid, her jade-like face immediately thawed and turned into a warm smile. She lightly jumped to his side. "Dennis." She saw that everyone was watching. Then she added 2 words, "Mr. Dennis." The helper was her future husband, and he had the responsibility to protect his wife. Naturally, Avina was not angry, but happy. Chapter 5:13. As soon as Reynolds brought Mithrin to the small garden, he saw her flipping open her notebook and firing questions like a machine gun. After the modification of this divine art, the effect is a little different from what I expected. What should I do? The use of the power of faith here is theoretically possible, but why can't I do it well? I also feel that it's very difficult here. I wrote you a letter. Why didn't you reply to me? When facing other people, Mithrin felt that speaking a word was tiring, but in front of Reynolds, she didn't feel this way at all. She even felt that she could talk for half a day. Perhaps this was because Pastor Reynolds had a reassuring aura. The girl thought so. Reynolds carefully flipped through the contents of the notebook, which was a record of Mithrin's research on the modification of the divine art after she returned. Mithrin sat beside him, her hands on her legs, her palms holding her head like a flower. She silently stared at Reynolds's face, patiently waiting for him to flip through the pages. But after reading only 2 or 3 pages, Reynolds found several problems. Finally, he couldn't bear it anymore and complained, "Wow, you can't even do this, dummy. You're so stupid. This is just a second-level divine art. Why can't you just cast it after more than a week?" Ugh! Mithrin lowered her head, feeling wronged, and reluctantly defended herself. But this is a modified divine art. After the modification of the divine art, the level and difficulty could no longer be based on the original standard, but it wasn't like 1 + 1 is equal to 2. The specific level needed to be specifically evaluated to know. And this disease cure divine art was a second-level divine art before the modification. According to the standard of a normal person, the original version would take half a month or even a month to master, and the process would also require a lot of practice and guidance, not to mention the modified version. It only took Mithrin a week to be able to cast the spell. This speed was worthy of her title as a genius of magic. Unfortunately, this was still some distance away from Reynolds's standard. "Dummy, have you been slacking off this week? You didn't spend all your time on this, did you?" Renaud asked again. Mithrin blinked her big eyes, somewhat unsure of how to answer. She felt that she was working hard, right? He spent a lot of time studying the divine arts every day. However, it was true that she didn't spend all her time on this. After all, she was still a bishop. Even though Bishop Yek had arranged for people to help her with the mundane affairs, there were still many things that she had to deal with personally. Reynolds saw that she didn't speak. After thinking for a while, he felt that he had probably guessed the reason. He reached out and touched her head. "Sigh. Actually, I understand you. After all, you're a girl. There are always a few days every month when it's inconvenient for you. I can't be too strict. However, you have to remember that people like us who don't have good talent must not feel sorry for ourselves. Instead, we have to work even harder to catch up to those geniuses. If it was my senior brother, forget it. Let's not talk about these useless things. Let's continue." Mithrin nodded vigorously and rubbed her head against Reynolds's palm. Reynolds then began to answer her various questions and very patiently helped her reorganize her thoughts. Mithrin, on the other hand, was making notes in her notebook by the light of the magic lamp in the little garden. Bishop Yek had already gone back. He seemed to be very assured of the 2 young people and was not afraid that they would do anything out of line. Of course, it might be better if they did. Unfortunately, when Mithrin returned very late, The two of them were still engaged in a very simple academic discussion. After sending Mithrin away, Reynolds and the old bishop had the opportunity to open the money pouch that Bishop Yeck had given them. Good heavens, a total of 50 gold coins. Who would have thought that the record for the highest amount of offerings said in the morning would be broken so quickly? These people really don't treat money as money. Reynolds couldn't help but sigh. Don't forget, this is just the money for a random ceremony, the old bishop reminded him. Reynolds then asked, "So now, we're considered rich, right?" The old bishop nodded. "That's good. I'll go to the market tomorrow and buy beef, mutton, and fish, buy. Vegetables, plates, and milk for the kittens. I'll buy until I'm full," Reynolds said excitedly. Just like that, Reynolds experienced the life of a rich person the next day. He chewed so much beef that his teeth hurt. Although there were still no believers in the church today, and the church was still very quiet, he felt very fulfilled. Is this the life of a rich person? It's so simple and unpretentious. But that night, an unfamiliar guest came to the door. It was a fat middle-aged man with a hairline that was on the verge of collapse. He wasn't a believer here, nor was he a neighbor nearby. He was just wandering around in boredom. When he passed by the church, he wanted to come in and vent his frustrations. This kind of thing was very common in the sinless city. The prosperity here brought convenience and enjoyment to the people, but it also brought heavy pressure. People habitually went to the church to seek comfort and psychological counseling. The normal clergy wouldn't reject them. Even if they weren't believers, they would still listen and comfort them. If they were comforted well, they might take the opportunity to join the church. Therefore, Reynolds didn't reject him and led him to the confession room that had been converted from a confession room. The middle-aged man sat in the narrow confession room and felt a little strange. The confession room here was very small, much smaller than the other churches. It felt more like a detention room. It was fine to go in, but it would be very troublesome to come out later. Maybe it was because the church was very small to begin with. He didn't think too much about it. However, he soon heard the clanking of chains and the sound of locks being locked. The door that he had entered through had been firmly locked by Reynolds. "Why did you lock the door?" he hurriedly asked. "Oh, this is a ritual of our church. It symbolizes locking in your troubles and suffering. When you come out, they will leave you." Reynolds answered outside the door and turned to the other side of the confession room. He opened the window in the middle. The confessionals and confessionals of other churches were separated from the clergy by beautiful glass or hollow patterns. But here, they were separated by metal rods as thick as fingers. It looked like a prison or a cage. This was Reynolds's modification request, and it was very puzzling as to why it was designed like this. "Okay, what's troubling you? Tell me." Chapter 514. As Reynolds spoke, he handed him a cup of tea through the cell window. The middle-aged man took a sip of tea and did not speak. It was as if he was still thinking and organizing his words, but it was also as if he found it difficult to speak. This was also human nature. Not everyone could pour out their heart to a stranger. At times like this, a qualified priest needed to conduct some simple guidance to open the person's heart and let them pour out their heart to him. Although Reynolds had never done such a thing before, he had still learned the theoretical knowledge from the Lord. Thus, he took the initiative to speak and try to guide the other party. Name, age, occupation, address? The middle-aged man was stunned, but he still answered truthfully, "My name is George. I'm 45 years old. I'm a small foreman. I live on 4th Avenue behind 3 streets." Seeing that the other party had finally spoken, Reynolds continued to guide. "What's your motive and purpose for coming here?" Actually, I have a friend. He hasn't been doing well recently." The middle-aged man was halfway through his sentence when Reynolds suddenly interrupted. "Tell me honestly, is this friend of yours?" This is me." "That's right. Confess, and you'll be lenient. Tell me what's troubling you." Only then did the middle-aged man explain his situation in detail. It was roughly the common midlife crisis. His job was not going well. The competition was too strong. The pressure was too great. The relationship was not harmonious. insomnia, frequent urination, hairline, and so on. Reynolds listened silently, interrupting from time to time to ask about the details. What's going on here? Explain it clearly. Why are you engaged in vicious competition with your peers? Do you know that this is against the law? Why didn't you report something like this in time? As the middle-aged man spoke, he felt that something was wrong. Why did this seem like an interrogation? And there was an iron window in the middle. It really did feel like that. However, in the end, he still gave a rough explanation of the situation. Reynolds stood up, organized his words, and said, I understand your situation. I understand your situation. Don't be afraid. I won't help you repent. There's a way to solve your troubles. Reynolds said as he helped him unlock the chains and iron lock on the confessional door and let him out. The middle-aged man could not help but heave a sigh of relief. Renaud, in turn, assumed a serious air and said in an impassioned tone, Don't be afraid when you encounter difficulties. Face them with a smile. The best way to overcome worries is to face them. Perseverance is victory. Do your best. He wanted to motivate and encourage the other party. The middle-aged man was stunned when he heard this. He paused for a moment before replying. Mr. Pastor, I understand your reasoning, but you mean I should go to the bar for a drink? Or find a woman to vent? Of course not. Why would you think that? Forget it. Come with me. Reynolds said as he led him all the way to the entrance of the church. At this time, it was already night outside, and the moonlight was bright, rendering the surrounding streets silvery white. If you want to forget your troubles and relieve your stress, the easiest way is to run, Reynolds said. Running. The middle-aged man couldn't help but widen his eyes, but wasn't already night time? Reynolds did not answer. Instead, he cast 2 divine spells on the middle-aged man. It was a level 3 protection divine spell, endurance, and frenzy. When combined, it was equivalent to a weakened version of Valor's inspiration. It was the same as the level 5 divine spell that Reynolds had cast on the jewelry in Sir Donald's manor. The group version of this divine spell was the Valor's Prayer that Reynolds had wanted to cast yesterday, but was stopped. However, when casting the divine spell, Reynolds felt a little bit off. It seemed that the process was not as smooth as before, and there was a slight obstruction. He did not think much about it. Maybe it was because he had not used this kind of low-level divine spell for a long time and was rusty. The middle-aged man who was blessed by the magic spell suddenly felt a surge of hot blood in his body. His whole body felt like it was on fire. He even felt that he had become several years younger. He couldn't help but shout loudly, Don't worry, I'm going to kill you. Ah, my youth is back. Go. Release your hot blood and youth. Sprinkle your sweat and passion, and run towards the moon. Renaud added, giving him another push on his back. The middle-aged man immediately spread his legs and began to run wildly along the street. Although he was extremely excited, he did not lose his rationality and could still control his actions. He could even feel the changes in his heart, so he would not lead to the tragedy of the bishop. This was also because Reynolds did not cast any divine spells that affected people's emotions and thoughts. As he ran, the middle-aged man did not feel tired. Instead, he felt more and more relaxed. The heavy burden in his heart seemed to have been expelled from his body along with his sweat. His whole body felt comfortable and relaxed. Just like that, he ran for 2 hours straight. By the time he returned to the entrance of the church, the duration of the divine spell had also ended. Immediately, he felt fatigue and soreness wash over him like a tide. He had no strength left in his body, and he could not even stand properly. He could only sit down at the entrance of the church, leaning against the wall as he panted. But even so, he still found a touch of relaxation and refreshment that he had not felt for a long time. He actually forgot the pain and frustration that had accumulated in his heart. After hearing the noise outside, Reynolds came out with a kitten on his head. He was training these kittens just now. Mr. George, are you okay? Reynolds asked, very tired, but very refreshed and relaxed. I feel great. George's face showed a very natural and relaxed smile. Do you need any help? No, just let me sit for a while. To tell you the truth, when I was young, I was the best runner in the village. I ran faster than a dog. Many girls like me because of that. Huh, George said very happily. Compared to the gloomy look he had when he first came in, it was as if he had become a different person. Reynolds kindly poured a cup of tea for him. He gulped it down and felt that his body had recovered some strength. He could now move on his own. Thank you so much, Mr. Pastor. If it's possible, can I come again tomorrow? Of course. Right, I almost forgot. As George spoke, he hurriedly searched his body for some money, but to no avail. Sorry, I seem to have forgotten to bring money today. Can I bring it to you tomorrow? Of course. Reynolds replied with a kind smile on his face. Chapter 5:15. When Reynolds smiled, his smile was always gentle and gentle. It was the most standard kind of smile, and no one could find fault with it. However, George felt an inexplicable feeling in his heart when he saw that smile. Even his back felt slightly cold. Maybe I'm too tired that I'm hallucinating. This young priest is such a good person. Anyway, I'll come over tomorrow morning to donate the money before I go to the construction site. I can't lie to a good person like him. George did not think too much about it. He said goodbye to Reynolds and limped back to his house. That night, he slept soundly. It had been a long time since he woke up, and he was not disturbed by nightmares at all. So he quickly packed up and rushed to Mia's church with the money. Truth be told, he did not have to go to the church at all. After all, services like confessions were free in name, and donations were all voluntary. Besides, he was not a follower of Mia's cult. Even if he did not go, no one would say anything about it. However, he instinctively felt that if he did not keep his promise, something bad might happen to him. And he really did not want to lie to the kind priest. When he arrived at the church, he saw that the young priest was training the kittens. He forced them to form a line and waved a paddle in his hand, making the kittens follow his rhythm and meow. Cats can be so obedient too. George was a little confused, but then he thought about it. There is no lack of sorcerers in the world who used cats as their magical pets or familiars. So it was not surprising that priests, who were as mysterious as sorcerers, had mastered similar skills. Besides, this young priest was really something. Before yesterday, he did not believe that a simple jog could make him relax and fall asleep peacefully. When Reynolds noticed that there were guests, he ended his morning training and encouraged the kittens. You guys have to work hard. We don't have many people here, so we're counting on you guys to help us out. In my hometown, cats are very magical creatures. They can cook, clean, mine, and fight with terrifying dragons. They can even send their severely injured owners back to their campsites on handcarts. They can even transform into cute, beautiful girls. So, you have to believe in yourselves. As long as you work hard, you can do it. Didn't someone with such poor talent like me learn the divine arts? After Reynolds finished speaking, he waved his hand to signal for the kittens to disperse and walked towards George. George hurriedly handed him 10 silver coins and promised to come back at night. However, he did not mention anything about joining the church. He turned around and left in a hurry. Reynolds wasn't in a hurry. This person couldn't run away. Once he was addicted to the thrill of exercise, it wouldn't be easy to stop. Just like himself, if he didn't exercise every day, he would feel that something was missing in his life. The old bishop, on the other hand, was more cunning. Every time Reynolds asked him to train with him, he would always use all kinds of excuses to refuse. For the next 3 days, George would come over every night and bring money with him. However, Reynolds did not cast any more magic spells on him. He only asked George to do what he could and not try to be brave and hurt himself. Training was, after all, one's own business. What one relied on was one's own body. If one relied on divine arts, how could it be called training? Although George did not run as well as he did on the first night, the results were not bad. The worries in his heart began to lessen. He could sleep soundly every night and was much more energetic during the day. Everything was going well. He even planned to tell a few of his friends who were also experiencing a midlife crisis to run with him and then find a suitable opportunity to join Mia's church. Unfortunately, George did not come on the 4th night. On the morning of the 5th day, Reynolds suddenly received news of his death. The news was brought by Undine. George had died in his own house. I'm sorry. I've been so busy recently that I didn't have time to visit you. Who would have thought that something like this would happen to me today? Let's talk about the details on the way, Undine said softly. She threw another 20 silver coins into the gift box. Half of it was a gift for moving into the new house, and the other half was Reynolds' salary for the day. On the way there, she briefly explained the case. According to the neighbor's description, George was acting a little strange yesterday. He came home early from the construction site and locked himself in his room. He did not go out for a run at night. His face, which had obviously improved in the past few days, became gloomy again. In the end, he died in front of his desk that night. Then he lived alone. It was only when the servant came to clean the house that they found that he seemed to be writing a letter to someone. However, the letter had turned into ashes and was scattered everywhere. It was as if he had burned it himself. Have you informed his family? Renaud asked. His wife has a boy toy outside, and the child is not her own. His parents have passed away long ago, and he has not contacted any other relatives for many years. We don't know who to inform at the moment. What a pitiful man. Undine couldn't help but sigh. She then said, That's right. I heard from his neighbor that he has been coming to your church a lot recently and has been getting a lot of relief and guidance. You seem to be trying to turn him into a believer. Reynolds nodded and said truthfully. He wanted to invite a few more friends to join the church, but this happened. He may have all kinds of small problems and use some competitive business methods, but he still shouldn't have died like this. While the two of them were chatting, they soon arrived at George's residence. His body was still in its original state, lying on the desk. There was an empty bottle of wine beside it. He was only wearing pajamas. There were no visible wounds and no bleeding. Even his expression before death was very calm. There were no signs of sudden illness at all. His death was very strange, so the case was handed over to Undine for investigation. As soon as Reynolds stepped into the bedroom, he immediately felt something. He quickly walked behind the body and reached out to tear open his pajamas, revealing his back that had begun to show black spots. Reynolds then cast the divine insight spell, causing his eyes to light up like a flashlight, projecting 2 light spots on the back of the corpse. As his gaze swept across the body, a dark green pattern suddenly appeared on the back of the body. It was a pattern of a dagger piercing through the heart, right at the position of the heart. Reynolds did not need to speak. Even Undine, who was beside him, recognized this notorious pattern. This is a level 5 evil curse, heart-stealing piercing. Chapter 516. As one of the most notorious curses, the number of people who had been harmed by it was enough to circle the entire sinless city. This curse was insidious and hidden, and its incubation period was especially long. It could last for as long as a month, and its fluctuations would be eliminated with time, making it almost inaudible. It was very difficult to be detected, and the victim would not be able to sense it. At the same time, it also had some advantages that curses had, such as long-distance control, making it difficult to trace the source of the curse after it was activated, and so on, further enhancing its stealth. Among the various curses, its concealment was definitely ranked at the top. The only weakness of the curse was that it was a little weak. It could only cause cardiac arrest once. If the victim was strong enough or had something to protect them from a curse, they might be able to survive. If the victim was treated in time after the attack, there was also a chance that the victim could be saved. This was the price of concealment. Therefore, it was obviously impossible to use this curse to deal with important people and powerhouses. However, it was easy to deal with ordinary people like George. It's these cultists again. Why are they so rampant recently? It would be great if there were a few more cranium crushers in this city. Undine frowned and said unhappily. She then turned to one of her subordinates and asked, I remember the information said that this curse can only be planted after close contact. Can you investigate who the deceased has been in contact with recently? This is basically impossible. The deceased was a foreman with dozens of workers under him. He had to come into contact with many people every day. Moreover, this curse has an incubation period of up to a month. It's impossible to investigate, the subordinate said with difficulty. The incubation period was too long. It was difficult for the sheriff to find anything with his investigation methods. Undine placed her hopes on Reynolds again and quickly asked, "What do you think?" Reynolds pondered for a moment and suddenly recalled a detail that he had almost overlooked a few days ago. When he was blessing George with the divine spell, he felt a slight obstruction. At that time, he didn't think much about it and thought that it was because he hadn't used these low-level divine spells for too long. But now that he thought about it, it was very likely that the divine spell had collided with the curse and dispelled it. In other words, George's body had been cursed earlier. It should have been a long time ago, so Reynolds did not feel anything strange. After that, it was accidentally dispelled. The murderer planted it again and finally killed George with a curse. If it was a newly planted curse, its evil energy wave would not dissipate so quickly, and the concealment effect would not be too excessive. At least, Reynolds was confident that he would be able to detect it. However, when he saw George a few nights ago, Reynolds did not notice anything strange, which meant that the second curse should have been planted yesterday. Therefore, the moment Reynolds entered the room, he immediately felt that something was wrong. This way, the scope of the investigation could be greatly reduced. According to the neighbors, George seemed to have gone out in the morning yesterday and did not go out after that. Reynolds thought to himself and quickly sorted out the logic. He then hurriedly mentioned this important discovery and asked the sheriffs to continue investigating based on this clue. Undine's spirit couldn't help but be refreshed. She couldn't help but praise. Although your thoughts are occasionally strange, when it comes to human lives, you're still very reliable. Working with you was the right choice. After that, she quickly assigned tasks to her subordinates, asking them to question George's workers and neighbors to find out where he went yesterday. Reynolds looked at the sheriff's busy. First, he cast a soothing theurgy to send George's soul to rest in peace. This time, he did not imitate Mithrin's method of doing anything fancy. Instead, he used the simplest soothing theurgy. George had made offerings to the goddess and had plans to join the church. He could be considered a quasi-believer of the church, so he should follow some of the church's teachings, be humble, and keep a low profile. He was not suitable for such a grand occasion. As the soothing theurgy was cast, the shadow of George's soul appeared out of thin air, looking exceptionally peaceful. "It's okay. I'll send the murderer to see you soon and let him repent to you," Reynolds said in his heart. In fact, he had noticed the detail before, but he did not tell Undine and the others. The murderer could plant the curse without anyone noticing. Obviously, he had a very clear understanding of its performance. He should also know that the curse just planted would not be so subtle, but he still could not wait to activate it. It was very likely that George had discovered some important secret, so the murderer had to kill him quickly to silence him. If he couldn't catch the culprit quickly, he would have to escape with the secret. I remember George said that he took on the job of an archaeologist a month ago. Reynolds continued to ponder. Archaeologists had always been one of the cultists' favorite disguises. They often used archaeology as an excuse to hire people to secretly dig up the tombs of evil gods or build altars. After that, they would sacrifice all the workers. Similar tragedies had happened many times. A month's time coincided with the incubation period of the curse. He asked Undine for the investigation report and looked at it. There was a statement from George's assistant mentioning that they had worked for an archaeologist named Sandro. Because the ancient site to be excavated was a little far from the Sinless City, the progress had been very slow. Many people's hands were held back, and George was very anxious about it. Reynolds had heard of Sandro before. He was considered a somewhat famous person in the city, and he often saw his name in the newspapers. It was just that his academic achievements were far inferior to his social achievements. No one had heard of him producing any outstanding academic results. On the contrary, he often attended various public events to make himself known. It was said that he had a close personal relationship with many important people in private. For a small sheriff like Undine, it was difficult for her to investigate this kind of person. George was just a small fry and other than Reynolds, no one would care about his life or death. Therefore, this kind of thing should be left to Cranium Crusher, Reynolds said in his heart, but he did not mention it to Undine. After the routine work here was done, Undine quickly brought her men to continue the investigation. Reynolds returned to the church alone and told the elderly bishop about the matter. The elderly bishop listened in silence and habitually took out his divination tools, but he quickly reminded Klein, "Don't worry." However, he quickly reminded, "The other party is a person of status. Won't it be bad for you to just go there? Don't worry. Do you think I'm a kind of person who doesn't know what's important?" Renault said confidently. "You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.